You think I'm scared of you? Ryan Carter laughed, grabbing Emma's wrist right in front of her father. Your old man fixes bikes for a living. What's he gonna do? Jack Donovan turned slowly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists. He just looked at the young man with eyes that had once made hardened criminals go completely silent and said quietly, "Let go of my daughter's arm. Right now." The smile on Ryan's face lasted exactly 3 more seconds. Then something in Jack's expression made it disappear entirely. If you're new here, welcome. Subscribe to this channel, stay with me until the very end of this story, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to where it all began. The morning. Ryan Carter first drove through Cedar Valley, Washington. Jack Donovan was already elbow-deep in the engine of a 1978 Harley-Davidson shovelhead that belonged to a retired schoolteacher named Gerald, who drove 40 miles just because he trusted Jack's hands more than anyone else in 3 counties. Jack heard the car before he saw it. A black BMW with custom rims too expensive for this part of the state, moving too slowly down the main road, the way people do when they want to be noticed. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and didn't look up. In his experience, people who drove like that were usually looking for an audience. He had no interest in being one. The car stopped in front of the diner across the street. 4 young men climbed out, all of them wearing the same athletic brand. The one in front, tall, sharp-jawed, wearing a jacket with championship patches sewn across the shoulders, stretched his arms wide and looked around Cedar Valley, the way a person looks at something they've already decided isn't worth their time. Jack went back to Gerald's engine. I had a daughter to feed, a carburetor to rebuild, and absolutely no reason to care about a young man with a jacket full of patches he hadn't earned yet in any way that mattered. But Cedar Valley was a small town, and in small towns, the things you try to avoid have a way of finding you anyway. Jack's garage sat at the corner of Mill Street and Caldwell Avenue, right at the edge of the commercial district where the old hardware store used to be before it closed 9 years back. The garage itself wasn't much to look at. Concrete floor. Metal shelving along the east wall stacked with parts and fluids and tools that each had a specific place. A hand-painted sign above the door that read, "Donovan's no job, too worn out." His daughter Emma had painted that sign when she was 11 years old, and Jack had never once considered replacing it. Inside the garage, there were photographs pinned to a corkboard near the cash register. Emma at 7 years old, holding a fish she'd caught at Miller's Pond. Emma at 13, wearing a cap and gown at her middle school graduation. Emma last spring standing with her debate team, holding a first-place trophy above her head. There were no photographs of Jack. Not from before, not one. His neighbors knew him as the man who opened his garage at 7. Every morning, closed it at 6. Every evening attended every one of Emma's school events, coached the junior Little League team 2 summers in a row, and brought food to Mrs. Patterson down the block whenever she had a bad week. They knew him as reliable, as quiet, as decent. They knew him as the kind of man who fixed your motorcycle for $30 less than he should have charged, and who'd once driven 40 minutes in the snow to jump-start the car of a woman he barely knew because her husband had called the garage in a panic. They did not know anything else, and Jack had worked very, very hard to make sure it stayed that way. Emma Donovan was 16 years old and already smarter than most of the adults in Cedar Valley, a fact she was gracious enough not to mention too often. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, and she read 3 books a week and had opinions about everything and apologized for exactly none of them. She was also, and Jack both loved and feared this about her, completely unafraid. She got that from him too. He just wished she hadn't. On the Thursday morning that would mark the real beginning of everything, Emma came through the garage door at 7:45, carrying 2 coffees from the gas station on the corner, which she did every Thursday because she didn't have first period on Thursdays, and because she knew her father forgot to eat breakfast when he was focused on a job. "The Harley again," she said, setting a cup on the metal stool beside him. "Gerald's going on a trip next week. Wants to make sure she's solid before he leaves." Gerald is 72 years old. Gerald is also the best person in this town and can do whatever he wants. Emma smiled and climbed up onto the workbench along the wall, sitting cross-legged the way she'd done since she was 5 years old. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup and watched her father work for a moment. "Dad," she said. Did you see the guys who came in yesterday? The ones with the BMW?" Jack's hands kept moving. "Saw the car. The tall one is Ryan Carter. He's like some kind of regional champion, mixed martial arts. His dad is Richard Carter, the Carter Group. They develop properties. Someone said they're looking at buying the Mercer land north of town." People at school are already talking about him like he's famous. People talk about a lot of things. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "He looked at you weird when he walked past yesterday." Jack looked up from the engine for the first time. "What kind of weird?" "Like you were furniture," Emma said. "Like you weren't worth seeing." Jack held his daughter's gaze for just a moment. Then he went back to the engine. "Some people look at everyone that way," he said. "Doesn't say anything about you. Says everything about them." Emma nodded slowly. She believed him. She always believed him. She just didn't know yet that her father had spent years in rooms where being looked at like furniture was what kept you alive. The first real encounter happened 4 days later. Ryan and his group had made themselves comfortable in Cedar Valley in the way that people with money and confidence do, loudly, casually, and with the assumption that everyone nearby was glad they'd arrived. They ate at the diner twice a day and left tips that were just large enough to make the waitresses feel obligated rather than grateful. They used the town park for outdoor training sessions that they filmed on phones. They talked about their plans for the Carter Group development in front of anyone who would listen, which apparently included describing what Cedar Valley could become if the right people invested in it, a statement that required the current residents to silently absorb the implication that they themselves were not the right people. Ryan moved through all of it with the particular ease of someone who had never once been told no in a way that stuck. Jack watched from a distance, the way he watched most things, quietly, thoroughly, and without letting anyone know he was paying attention. Then Ryan walked into his garage. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Jack was finishing up a tune-up on a Honda Shadow for a woman named Carol Briggs, who needed it ready by Friday for a charity run. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Ryan Carter standing in the middle of the garage floor, hands in his pockets, looking around at the walls and shelves and tools with an expression that landed somewhere between curiosity and mild contempt. "You, Jack," Ryan said. "That's on the sign," Jack said, and turned back to the Honda. A pause. Ryan moved further into the space. Jack heard him pick something up from the shelf and set it back down. "Nice little place," Ryan said with an emphasis on the word little that was doing a lot of work. "Thanks. You need something worked on." "No, I don't own a motorcycle." He said the word motorcycle the way someone says something slightly embarrassing about someone else. "My dad is looking at the land north of town. We're staying a few more weeks while the deal goes through, just walking around getting to know the area." "Then you've gotten to know it," Jack said. "Anything else?" Ryan's eyes moved around the garage again, and this time they landed on the corkboard with the photographs. He looked at them for a moment. Emma at 7. Emma at 13. Emma and the debate trophy. "Your kid," he said. Jack's hands slowed just slightly on the wrench. Just slightly. "Yeah," he said. "Pretty girl." The words were neutral. Jack measured them anyway the way he used to measure everything. "She goes to the school here." "She does." Ryan moved back toward the door. He stopped in the frame and looked back over his shoulder. "You know, my dad's development is going to bring a lot of changes to this area. Better businesses, better economy, real opportunities." Jack didn't respond. "Might be good for a place like this," Ryan continued. "Give people something more to look forward to than fixing old bikes." He smiled. It was a handsome smile. It knew it was handsome. Then he walked out. Jack set down the wrench very carefully. He stood still for exactly 15 seconds. Then he picked the wrench back up and went back to Carol's Honda. He was 53 years old and had learned over a long and very serious life that the moments that truly mattered almost never came with warning. They came like that. Like a kid in a nice jacket walking through your door and saying things that sounded like compliments but weren't. He recognized the type. He had once, a long time ago, in another life, entirely been something like it himself. Here is where the story requires some explanation. Not about who Jack Donovan was becoming, about who Jack Donovan had already been. There is a version of Jack's past that can be told in a few clean sentences. He would not tell you those sentences. Not because he was ashamed, though there were specific things, specific moments, specific decisions he had made in his 30s that he had spent years sitting quietly with, but because the clean version was also the wrong version. The wrong version made it sound like a movie. And the truth was, never a movie. The truth was that at 22 years old, Jack Donovan had been a prospect for the Iron Ridge chapter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club in eastern Washington, and by 30, he had become its president, and by 34, he had expanded the chapter's reach and reputation across 4 states in a way that people who knew anything about that world talked about for years afterward. Not because of violence, though there had been violence the way there is in any world that operates outside the laws that comfortable people take for granted, but because of something rarer and more difficult to explain to someone who has never had to build it from nothing. Jack Donovan could walk into a room of 200 men who would hurt each other over a misread glance, and within 3 minutes, those men would be listening to him. Not because he was the biggest, not because he was the most dangerous, though the ones who had seen him in a genuine crisis knew better than to test that particular theory, but because Jack Donovan had a quality that could not be taught in any gym or bought with any amount of money. He understood people. I understood what men who had never been given anything in their lives were actually asking for when they got angry. He understood the difference between a man who was dangerous because he was afraid, and a man who was dangerous because he'd stopped being afraid of anything at all. He understood in a way that was almost uncomfortable to witness how to make a person feel seen and respected, and part of something larger than themselves, and he understood equally well how to make them feel the full weight of his disapproval without ever raising his voice. It was a kind of leadership that you either had or you didn't. Jack had it in a way that people remembered. And then, at 36 years old, his wife Sarah died. She died quickly, an aneurysm, the doctors said, which meant that on a Tuesday morning in March, she was fine, and by Tuesday afternoon she was gone, and Jack sat in a hospital corridor for 6 hours, understanding that the world was now entirely different and would never go back. Emma was 2 years old. Jack looked at his daughter, at her mother's eyes in her small face, and made a decision that no one in his chapter fully believed he would actually follow through with. He retired. He stepped back from the presidency, handed authority to the man he trusted most, and moved to Cedar Valley, a town he had passed through once 3 years earlier, and remembered as quiet, and opened a motorcycle garage. He told no one where he was going. The people who needed to know knew. The people who might have come looking, and there were a few in the first couple years, men with unfinished business or injured pride, found instead that Jack Donovan had simply become unavailable. Not hiding, not afraid, simply done. He had made Emma a promise, and Jack Donovan, whatever else he had been or done or survived, had never once broken a promise that mattered. The second time, Ryan Carter came to the garage. He wasn't alone. He brought 2 of his training partners, both of them large, both of them wearing the same kind of easy confidence that comes from being around someone who always wins. And he came on a Saturday afternoon when the garage was busy, when 3 customers were waiting, and Gerald had stopped by to chat, and a teenage boy named Marcus, who sometimes helped Jack on weekends, was in the back washing parts. Ryan stood at the entrance and waited until Jack looked up from his work. "Your daughter almost walked into me at the diner this morning," Ryan said. Jack straightened slowly. "That right. Almost spilled my coffee. She didn't apologize." There was a very specific stillness that came over Gerald in the moment, the particular stillness of a 72-year-old man who had lived long enough to recognize when a room changed temperature. "Emma's polite," Jack said. "If she didn't apologize, she didn't think she'd done anything wrong." "Well, she was with her friends being loud, not paying attention." "Is there something you need me to work on?" Jack said. Ryan blinked. He hadn't expected the interruption. He was the kind of person who was not often interrupted. I'm just saying, Ryan said, that maybe she should watch where she's going. And maybe, Jack said, keeping his voice the same temperature it always was, which was the temperature of a thing that has no temperature at all. You could walk around a teenage girl instead of waiting for her to move out of your way. One of the training partners shifted his weight. Ryan's jaw tightened just slightly. He looked around the garage at Gerald and Marcus, who had appeared silently in the back doorway, at the two waiting customers, who had gone very still. Then he smiled, the handsome smile. "Right," he said. "My mistake." And he left. Gerald waited until the sound of the BMW faded down the street. Then he looked at Jack. "That boy is trouble," Gerald said. "That boy," Jack said, picking up his wrench, "is going to be whatever he decides to be, same as anyone." Gerald watched him for a moment. "You know him. Never met him before last week." Gerald was quiet for another moment. "You're not worried, Gerald," Jack said. "I have been worried about exactly one thing for the last 14 years, and it is making sure Emma gets through high school without any more drama than she needs. A rich kid with a chip on his shoulder doesn't make that list." Gerald nodded slowly. I didn't say what he was thinking, which was that he had known Jack Donovan for 9 years, and in 9 years he had never once seen the man flinch at anything. Not a disagreement about money, not a difficult customer, not the ice storm, 2 winters back, that flooded the garage floor. But he had just now seen something very specific move across Jack's face for exactly 1 second, when Ryan Carter mentioned Emma. Not anger, not fear. Something much more controlled than either of those things. Something that Gerald, who was 72 years old and had seen a great deal of life, recognized instinctively as the face of a man who knew exactly how bad things could get. The incident at the hardware store happened 9 days after Ryan's second visit to the garage. Emma had walked down to pick up some supplies. Jack needed sandpaper, a replacement seal for a brake assembly, a specific bolt size he'd run out of. She had a list in her phone and money in her pocket, and was in the moderate hurry that teenagers are perpetually in when doing something for someone else. Ryan's group was on the sidewalk outside the hardware store when she came out. She said later that she had tried to just walk past. That she'd had her head down moving fast, not looking for a conversation. That was the truth. Emma Donovan did not go looking for trouble. She'd grown up in a household where peace was worked for every single day as an active and deliberate choice. But Ryan stepped slightly into her path. Not enough to block her completely. Just enough that she had to stop. "Hey," he said. "Mechanic's daughter." Emma looked up. She met his eyes the way her father had taught her to meet the eyes of anyone who tried to make her feel small, directly, without apology, without aggression. "Hi," she said flatly. "Where are you going in such a hurry?" "Home." She moved to step around him. He shifted again. Just slightly. The same small motion. And now his friends were positioned in a loose half-circle, not touching her, not threatening, just present in the way that numbers are present. "Your dad's still fixing old bikes," Ryan said. There was something in his voice that wasn't quite casual. Something with an edge under it pointed inward. "I heard he's been doing that since you were little. Same garage, same street, same town." "Yes," Emma said. "Must be a good life. Simple." He let the word hang. "Safe." Emma looked at him for a moment. Her face was very still. "My dad," she said, "works harder than anyone I've ever met, and he's the best person I know, so whatever you're implying, you can keep it." Ryan's expression shifted. Something flickered in it, the beginning of something unpleasant. "I'm just making conversation," he said. "No, you're not," Emma said. "You're being condescending. There's a difference. You're smart enough to know that." She looked at him steadily. "Excuse me." She walked forward. He didn't move. And that was when he made his first real mistake. He reached out and caught her arm. Not hard. Not violently. But he took hold of her wrist just above the bag of supplies she was carrying, and he said quietly, with the smile still on, "Hold on, I'm not done talking." Emma went absolutely still. In Cedar Valley, people who had been watching from across the street or from the diner window would later describe what happened next in slightly different ways. But they all agreed on one thing: the sound. A sound from across the street. A single voice, not loud, but carrying. "Let go of my daughter's arm, right now." Jack had come looking for Emma because she'd been gone 40 minutes longer than she should have been, and because Jack Donovan was the kind of father who noticed those things, and because somewhere in the part of him that he kept very carefully walled off from his ordinary life. Something had been paying attention to Ryan Carter in a way that his conscious mind had been arguing was unnecessary. He'd been right. He was almost always right. He hated it. He stood at the edge of the sidewalk, still in his work clothes, a rag hanging from his back pocket. He hadn't rushed over. He had walked, deliberately, measurably, with the particular kind of unhurried movement that people who knew anything about him would have recognized immediately as more alarming than running. Ryan turned to look at him. For a moment, something in Ryan's expression was purely instinctive, a flicker of something that his ego immediately overrode, a half-second of animal assessment that his brain quickly buried under layers of confidence and training and 24 years of never having had anyone make him feel physically uncertain. He let Emma's arm go, but he didn't step back. "We were just talking," Ryan said. "Emma," Jack said without taking his eyes off Ryan. "Come here." Emma walked to her father's side. She was shaking, though her face showed nothing. Jack put his hand briefly on her shoulder, once firm, steady, and then he looked back at Ryan Carter. "I'll give you a piece of advice," Jack said. "Free of charge. You won't have to earn it or work for it, which seems to be how you prefer things. Don't ever touch my daughter again." Ryan's friends had stiffened. One of them, a large young man named Derek, who had been training with Ryan for 3 years, and who believed genuinely that Ryan was the most capable person he had ever met, said, "Hey man." "I'm not talking to you," Jack said. He hadn't moved his eyes from Ryan. "I'm talking to him." The word him had a weight to it that was hard to explain afterward. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't angry. It simply reduced Ryan Carter in the space of a single syllable from a champion to a subject. Ryan felt it. He was smart enough to feel it even if he was too young and too proud to fully understand it. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," Ryan said. His voice had shifted slightly. Just slightly. The easy confidence was still there, but beneath it something had tightened. "You put your hand on my daughter," Jack said. "In my town, in front of a dozen people. That is not nothing." "Your town." Ryan repeated the words with an almost laugh. "You own a garage." Jack finally, for the first time since he'd walked across the street, smiled. It was not a warm smile. "Go home," Jack said. "Think about the kind of man you want to be, and understand that the way you're behaving right now is not that man." Then he turned and walked Emma away. Behind them, Ryan Carter stood on the sidewalk and felt something he was not accustomed to feeling, something that had no clean name, but that lived somewhere between embarrassment and rage, and a third thing that he wouldn't be able to identify for several more weeks. He had been dismissed, not argued with, not threatened, not matched and outmaneuvered, simply dismissed. By a mechanic in dirty work clothes who hadn't even bothered to raise his voice. That night, Emma sat at the kitchen table while Jack made dinner. He always cooked on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and tonight was scrambled eggs and toast, because some nights that's what you made, and she watched him moving around the kitchen with the same deliberate economy he brought to everything he did, and she said, "He's not going to let it go." Jack didn't answer right away. He stirred the eggs. "People like that rarely do," he said finally. "He embarrassed himself," Emma said. "Men like that don't forget being embarrassed." Jack looked at his daughter. He had raised her to be perceptive. Sometimes he forgot briefly how perceptive she actually was. "Men like that," he said carefully, "are often dealing with something they haven't figured out yet. Doesn't make their behavior acceptable, but it's worth understanding, Dad." Emma folded her hands on the table. "I'm not asking for a character analysis. I'm asking you if we're going to be okay." Jack slid the eggs onto 2 plates, put the toast alongside them, and carried them to the table. He sat across from his daughter. He looked at her for a long moment. "Emma," he said, "we are always going to be okay." She held his gaze. "How do you know?" "Because I will make sure of it," he said. And there is nothing on this earth that has ever stopped me from doing what I've decided to do." Emma studied her father's face. She had always known there was something in him that she didn't fully see, some depth, that the garage and the quiet mornings and the baseball coaching and the scrambled egg dinners were layered over something vast and still and very far down. She had never pushed on it. She had always sensed, without knowing why, that the day she fully understood her father was a day that would change her understanding of everything. She picked up her fork. "Okay," she said. She believed him. She had always believed him. Ryan Carter spent the next 4 days in a state that people who knew him well would have described carefully as agitated. He trained harder. He ran longer. He had short conversations with his training partners that ended with him walking away mid-sentence. He called his father twice and didn't say what he was actually thinking about. What he was actually thinking about was the way Jack Donovan had looked at him. Ryan had been in competitions. He'd stood across from state champions, from men who had dedicated years to being the most dangerous version of themselves in a controlled arena. He knew what it looked like when a person assessed you as an opponent. He knew the particular quality of attention that a fighter gave to another fighter. Jack Donovan had not looked at him like an opponent. He had looked at him the way a very experienced person looks at something they have already categorized, understood, and moved past. That was the thing Ryan couldn't shake. Not the dismissal itself, the completeness of it. He started asking around about Jack Donovan. Casual questions, the kind you ask at the diner when you're just making conversation. He asked the waitress who'd been working there for 8 years. He asked the guy at the gas station. He asked the owner of the hardware store who'd been watching the sidewalk incident through his window. What he got was consistent, and it confused him more than he wanted to admit. Jack, good man, best mechanic in the county. Been here about 14 years, keeps to himself. Real quiet, but the kind of quiet where you know there's something behind it. His daughter's a firecracker, smart as anything. People around here respect him. Not sure why exactly. You just do. That last answer from the gas station attendant, a 40-year-old man named Phil, who had a habit of saying exactly what he was thinking, stuck with Ryan. What do you mean, not sure why? Ryan pressed. Phil had thought about it. It's like, you know how some people walk into a room and you know they're important. But with most people, that's because they're loud, or they've got money, or they make sure you notice them. He shrugged. Jack's the opposite. He never makes sure you notice him. You just do. Ryan drove back to the house his father had rented for their stay. He sat in the car for a while. Then he got out and went inside and told his training partners they were doing a double session tomorrow. What he didn't tell them was that he was thinking about a motorcycle mechanic who looked at him like furniture, and that it was bothering him in a way he couldn't explain and absolutely refused to examine. The public challenge happened on a Saturday. It started at the farmers market of all places, which Cedar Valley ran every Saturday morning at the community center parking lot from 7 until noon. Jack went every Saturday because Emma liked the blueberries from the Henderson stand, and because Mrs. Torres made tamales that were, in Jack's opinion, among the finest things produced in the state of Washington. He was at the tamale stand when Ryan appeared. I wasn't alone. He had his training partners plus a few other young men Jack hadn't seen before, and several phones already recording. He had chosen the time and place carefully, Jack noted. Saturday morning at the market was the highest density of Cedar Valley residents in one location all week. Maximum audience. Maximum witnesses. Ryan walked up to Jack with the particular performance of someone who had rehearsed what they were going to do, but was pretending they hadn't. Hey, Ryan said, loud enough to be heard. Mechanic. Jack turned from Mrs. Torres's stand. Ryan, Jack said, same flat measured acknowledgement he gave to everything. I've been thinking about the other day, Ryan said. I don't think you treated me very respectfully. Mrs. Torres went very still behind her table. Around them, people were beginning to turn. I asked you not to put your hands on my daughter, Jack said. That's not a matter of respect. That's just a matter of facts. You talked to me like I was nobody, Ryan said, in front of everyone. I talked to you like what you were doing was wrong, Jack said. That's different. See, here's the thing. Ryan took a step closer. Not close enough to be threatening. Close enough to make the distance intentional. People around here seem to think you're something. Some kind of, I don't know, something. But from where I stand, you're a man who fixes motorcycles and thinks he can talk to me like I owe him something. The market had gone very quiet. Jack could feel the weight of every person within earshot paying complete attention. I don't think you owe me anything, Jack said. I think you owe my daughter an apology. Those are two different debts. And I think, Ryan said, that you've been coasting on some kind of reputation that nobody here can actually explain. People respect you, but nobody knows why. Nobody has any reason to. His voice had gotten louder, the performance deepening now. You want to know what I think it's fake. I think you've spent 14 years making people believe you're more than you are. And I think that when somebody actually tested you, he paused, letting the implication settle, you'd fold. The silence was complete. Jack looked at Ryan Carter. He took one slow breath. Then he said, I think this conversation is finished. He turned back to Mrs. Torres. He paid for his tamales. Hey. Ryan's voice had an edge in it now. I'm not finished. Jack paused with his back to Ryan. 1 full second. Then he turned around. And the expression on his face was the same expression it always was. Measured flat, completely controlled. But something behind his eyes had shifted. Something very old and very quiet had moved forward from wherever it usually waited, and the handful of people closest to him in that moment would later agree in their separate conversations that they had felt something change in the air. Ryan felt it too. His chin lifted, compensating for it. His chest came forward. Classic responses. Defensive instinct. If you have something real to say to me, Jack said very quietly, say it. If you're performing for these people. He glanced at the phone's recording. Then we're done, and I'm going to take my tamales home. Ryan stepped forward. Prove it, Ryan said. That's what I'm saying. You want people to respect you. Prove you deserve it. Fight me. Right now. In front of everyone. He spread his arms slightly. Unless the truth is that you're just a man who never got tested. Jack said nothing. Your daughter thinks you're a hero, Ryan said. Maybe it's time she found out the truth about her old man. The words landed in the exact way Ryan intended them to. And they landed also in a way he had not anticipated at all. Because the sentence was barely finished when Jack Donovan did something that nobody in Cedar Valley had ever seen him do. He reached up to his left wrist. He unfastened his watch, a plain old thing, nothing impressive to look at. He held it out to his side. Emma was 3 feet away. She had come to find him at the tamale stand. She had arrived just in time to hear the challenge. She stepped forward and took the watch without a word. Her eyes went to her father's face. Jack looked back at her for exactly 2 seconds. His expression didn't change. But something passed between them, some wordless father-daughter understanding that was older and more complex than the moment itself. And then he turned back to Ryan Carter. After today, Jack said, you stay away from my family. The crowd laughed. They couldn't help it. The man looked like what he was, a middle-aged mechanic in a flannel shirt, holding a brown paper bag of tamales. The kid across from him was 24, trained 6 days a week, covered in championship credentials, surrounded by his people. They thought they knew what was going to happen. They were so certain of what they knew. It is one of the most common human mistakes. Being certain and being wrong at exactly the same time. The space between the tamale stand and the edge of the parking lot was maybe 40 feet. Ryan's training partners cleared a rough circle. Phones went up. People crowded in from around the market because bad news and spectacle have pulled crowds since the beginning of recorded human history and probably before. Ryan moved first. He had a question in his mind as he closed the distance. He had been fighting competitively for 8 years. He had seen the way untrained people move the tells, the hesitations, the instinctive protectiveness around the face and the throat that gave everything away before a punch was even thrown. He was prepared for a street fight, messy and desperate and over quickly. What he was not prepared for was nothing. Jack Donovan did not look like a fighter. He stood with his weight evenly distributed, hands at his sides, face perfectly calm. He looked, Ryan thought, in the split second before he committed like a man waiting for a bus. Ryan's first combination was clean and fast. A double jab crossbody shot, the sequence he'd landed on state champions, on men who trained every day of their lives. It was good. It was very good. It connected with air. Not barely. Not almost. Air. Jack had moved not fast, not explosively, but at exactly the right moment, exactly the right distance, so that Ryan's fists found nothing, and Ryan found himself slightly off balance, and in the half second it took him to recover, he felt a hand at his collar that redirected his momentum, not fighting it, not overpowering it, working with it, and he went sideways and had to catch himself against the ground. I was up in an instant. That was training. That was years of drilling, getting up, no hesitation. But something had shifted in his assessment of what he was dealing with. He circled. Tried again. Different angle. Faster. He went low, changed levels, tried to get Jack to the ground where he was absolutely confident in his abilities. Jack stepped aside, let Ryan's shoulder go past him, and placed one controlled hand at the back of Ryan's neck that sent him forward and down to his knees in the parking lot with a force that Ryan could not immediately explain. The crowd had gone silent. Ryan got up. His hands were on the pavement first. He breathed. He reassessed. He went again. Harder this time, with genuine intention behind it. He landed nothing. Not one thing. Every punch redirected. Every grab slipped. Every attempt to close the distance was met with a movement that seemed impossibly to have been made before Ryan had finished deciding to make his move. It wasn't blocking. Blocking, you felt. This was something else. Ryan was swinging at a current of water that had no fixed position. The crowd was no longer making sound. Ryan planted his feet and came with a kick that he had knocked grown men down with. Jack caught his leg, just caught it one-handed at the shin, and held it, and looked at Ryan. And in that moment, held on one leg with the other, held absolutely still by a man he could not touch. Ryan. Carter understood something that landed in his chest like cold water. This man had never once been trying to defeat him. Jack released the leg. Ryan stepped back. He was breathing hard. Jack was not breathing hard. "That's enough," Jack said. The two words were not spoken loudly, but every person in that parking lot heard them clearly. Ryan stood in the middle of the cleared space. He had competed his whole life. He knew what it meant to lose. He had lost before in competition, and he had learned from it and moved forward because losing is part of the process, and champions understand that. But he had never not once experienced what had just happened. He had fought a man who had made the entire fight feel like a demonstration, like Ryan was a student who didn't know he was attending a class. Jack picked up his bag of tamales from where he'd set it at the edge of the circle. He looked at Ryan one more time. "Learn the difference," he said, "between something you're good at and something you understand." Then he walked to Emma, took his watch back from her without a word, and they walked together toward the edge of the market, and people parted without quite meaning to the way they part when something passes through that has weight to it. Ryan Carter stood in the circle for a long moment. His training partners were quiet. The phones had mostly lowered. The crowd was beginning to drift, but slowly, with backward glances. And Ryan Carter, 24 years old, undefeated state champion, a young man who had never in his life stood still with something he couldn't categorize, stood in that parking lot and felt the ground move under a story he had believed completely about himself. It was the most uncomfortable he had ever been. It was also the beginning of the only thing that had ever truly changed him. But he didn't know that yet. Right now, he only knew that a motorcycle mechanic with a bag of tamales had just done something to him that 8 years of training had not prepared him for. And somewhere in the back of his mind, behind the pride and the confusion and the anger that was already building as a defense against all of it, a single quiet question had begun that would not stop until it had an answer. Who is he? Richard Carter heard about the farmers market in 3 separate phone calls before noon on Saturday. The first call came from one of Ryan's training partners, a young man named Derek, who had the particular skill of describing events in ways that minimized how badly they had gone. Derek's version involved words like unexpected, unusual technique, and Your son held his own, given the circumstances. Richard had spent 30 years in business negotiations. He heard what wasn't being said as clearly as what was. The second call came from Ryan himself, which was unusual. Ryan rarely called his father after anything went wrong. He had learned young that his father's response to failure was not comfort, but assessment. And assessment was something Ryan had always preferred to do privately on his own terms before presenting conclusions. The fact that he called anyway told Richard more than the call itself. It was nothing, Ryan said, which was the first thing anyone says when something is very much not nothing. Some street brawl thing. The guy got lucky. You said he's a mechanic, Richard said. He runs a garage, yeah. And I said it was nothing, Dad. A pause. It's handled. The third call came from Richard's property liaison in Cedar Valley, a local real estate attorney named Simmons, who had been facilitating the Mercer land deal, and who had been at the farmer's market buying honey when the whole thing happened. Simmons had no reason to protect anyone's version of events. He described what he saw with the clean, unembellished precision of a man accustomed to legal language. When he finished, Richard was quiet for a moment. He didn't even put the bag down, Richard said. He set it at the edge of the space, Simmons said. Picked it up when it was over. Walked away with his daughter. Another silence. Find out who he is, Richard said. Everything. Simmons paused on the other end of the line. Mr. Carter, the deal is close to finalized. If we start poking into local residents that could create, I said find out who he is. Simmons found out. It took him 4 days. 2 contacts in Olympia, 1 very uncomfortable conversation with a retired sheriff's deputy from Eastern Washington, and a record search that kept returning results that made him read the same page twice to make sure he understood what he was looking at. When he called Richard back, he started the conversation by saying, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you is verified. I checked it 3 ways. Richard said, Tell me. Simmons told him. The silence on the line afterward lasted long enough that Simmons said, Mr. Carter, you still there? Send me everything, Richard said. Every document, everything. He ended the call and sat for a long time in the rented house on the north side of Cedar Valley. Then he smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of a man who believed he had just found the only thing he needed. He was wrong about that, but it would take him a while to understand how wrong. Ryan didn't sleep well the 3 nights after the farmer's market. He wasn't someone who normally had trouble sleeping. He trained hard, ate right, had spent years disciplining his body into a predictable machine. He went to sleep. He woke up. That was how it worked. But his mind kept returning to the parking lot in the way that a tongue returns to a cut on the inside of the mouth. Not because it's pleasant, but because something there is unresolved, and the body knows it, even when the mind tries to argue otherwise. He ran it back every sequence. He was good at that. Analysis was part of training. You reviewed, you identified the mistake, you corrected, you moved forward. It was a system. The system worked. Except the system required a mistake to identify, and Ryan couldn't find one. He'd done everything right. Technically. His combinations were clean. His timing was sharp. His transitions were exactly what 8 years of discipline looked like. He had not panicked. He had not abandoned his training under pressure. He had stayed composed and applied his skills exactly the way they were supposed to be applied. And the man hadn't been there. Over and over again in his memory. Just not there. Slightly to the left, slightly to the right, at an angle, at a distance, in a position that made Ryan's momentum work against him instead of forward. There was no drama in it. No athleticism he could point to and say, okay, that's the difference. That's the quality that explains it. It was something else. Something he didn't have a word for yet. He got up at 4 in the morning on the 3rd night and went to the living room and sat in the dark and did something he rarely did. He thought about what it meant. Derek appeared in the doorway at 4:30, drawn by the absence of sound rather than any noise. He looked at Ryan sitting in the dark and said after a moment, You good? I'm good, Ryan said. Derek sat down across from him. He was a good training partner and a decent person, and he had the sense to not immediately fill a silence. After a while, Ryan said, "Have you ever been in a situation where you did everything right and it still didn't work?" Derek thought about it honestly. "Yeah." "What did you do?" "Figured out what right actually meant." Ryan looked at him. "Sometimes right for the situation is different from right by the book," Derek said. He shrugged. "That's what Coach Alvarez always said. I thought it was just talk for a while." A pause. "It's not just talk." Ryan was quiet again. "The guy was something else," Derek said. "Not carefully, just as a fact. I've seen a lot of people fight. That guy was something I haven't seen." "He never tried to hit me," Ryan said. It was the thing that had been sitting at the center of his thinking for 3 days, the specific detail he kept returning to. "Not once. The whole time he never made a move to hit me. He was just making me miss." Derek absorbed that. "Why?" Ryan shook his head slowly. He didn't have the answer yet. But the question was in him now, and it was the right question, and those are the ones that don't let go. Richard Carter drove to Donovan's garage on a Wednesday morning alone, which was unusual for him. Richard Carter almost never went anywhere alone. He moved through the world with an assistant and a purpose, and the confidence of a man who had decided 30 years ago that the primary difference between people who got what they wanted and people who didn't was the willingness to walk through doors that intimidated them. He walked through Jack's garage door at 9:15 in the morning. Jack was at the back of the garage working on a Kawasaki. He looked up when he heard footsteps and assessed the man in the doorway in the same quiet way he assessed everything. Richard Carter was 60 years old, well-dressed in the way of men who spend money deliberately rather than carelessly gray at the temples, carrying the particular posture of someone who had won enough arguments to stop having to prove it to anyone who wasn't directly relevant. Jack recognized the type immediately. He had negotiated with men like Richard Carter in conference rooms and parking lots, and once on a bridge in Spokane at midnight. He had found them consistent in one particular way. They always believed fundamentally that their information was their power. That knowing something about you was the same as having leverage over you. "Mr. Donovan," Richard said. He came in slowly, hands visible projecting the body language of reasonable conversation. "I'm Richard Carter, Ryan's father." "I know who you are," Jack said. He didn't put down his tools. "You hear about your son?" "Partly." Richard moved to the center of the garage floor. He looked around the space in a way that was different from the way Ryan had looked around it. Ryan's look had been dismissive. Richard's look was calculating, assessing value, assessing what the space said about the man who owned it. "I want to apologize for Ryan's behavior. With your daughter." Jack straightened slowly. He set down the wrench. He wiped his hands on the rag from his back pocket and turned to face Richard fully. "That's Ryan's apology to make," Jack said. "Not yours." Richard nodded as if he'd expected this. "Fair point. I also want to have a conversation man to man about where we go from here. My family is going to be in Cedar Valley for the next few weeks. I'd like things to be..." He paused, selecting the word uncomplicated. "Then keep your son away from my daughter," Jack said. "That's the only complication that exists." Richard smiled. It was the smile of a man transitioning from Act 1 to Act 2. "I've been doing some research," he said. "About you." He let that sit for a moment. "Interesting history." The garage was quiet. Outside, a car passed on Mill Street. "Is that right?" Jack said. His voice had not changed at all. "Iron Ridge chapter," Richard said. "President for 6 years. Quite a reputation." He tilted his head slightly. That's not the kind of background most people would expect from the quiet mechanic who coaches Little League. Jack looked at Richard Carter with the kind of look that made Simmons the attorney uncomfortable when he'd described it on the phone. The look that had no heat in it. The look that was more careful than angry, and more dangerous than either. "What do you want, Mr. Carter?" Jack said. "I want you to understand your position," Richard said. And now the business voice was showing through the voice that had closed deals and ended partnerships, and made people understand that there was the way things appeared to be going, and then there was the way Richard Carter decided they were going to go. A man with your history raising a daughter alone in a small town, that's a fragile situation. The wrong kind of attention could make things very difficult. The silence stretched. Then Jack nodded slowly, as if a question he'd had just been answered. "You're threatening me," he said. Not as an accusation, almost as a clarification. "I'm describing reality," Richard said. "You're describing what you think reality is," Jack said. "Those are different things." He picked up his wrench again and turned back to the Kawasaki. "I think you should leave, Mr. Carter." Richard stood for a moment, recalibrating. He had expected, he wasn't certain what he had expected. Fear, perhaps. Negotiation. Some version of the conversation where the man with the leverage explained his position and the man without it began calculating his options. He had not expected to be turned back to the motorcycle. "You should think very carefully," Richard said. "I have," Jack said without turning around. "I've thought about it every day for 14 years. My answer is the same as it's always been." A pause. "Your son has my phone number. If he wants to apologize to Emma, he can call." Richard stood in the garage doorway for 3 more seconds. Then he left. Jack listened to his footsteps recede. He listened to the car door. He listened to the engine turn over and the sound fade down Mill Street. Then he set down the wrench again. He stood still with his hands on the Kawasaki frame. His phone was in his back pocket. He took it out, found a contact he had not called in 2 years, and pressed dial. It rang twice. "Jack." The voice on the other end was deep and unhurried, with the particular quality of a man for whom urgency was a choice rather than a reflex. "Shepard," Jack said. "I need you to know something is happening. I'm going to handle it myself, but I need you to know." A pause. "How serious?" "Manageable. Richard Carter, property developer. He's been in the area looking at the Mercer land." Jack kept his voice flat and informational. "He found the history. He came to the garage this morning." "What did he say?" "He implied leverage. My past against my custody situation." Another pause. This one longer. "Jack." "I know." "You want me to?" "No," Jack said. "I said I'm handling it." "The chapter would." "No," Jack said again. Quieter this time, but with a quality in the word that ended the sentence in a particular way. "Emma doesn't see that world. That was the whole point." Shepard was silent for a moment. "All right. You call me if that changes." "I will." He ended the call. He stood for another moment in the still garage. Then he went back to the Kawasaki. He worked steadily for the next 4 hours and did not think about Richard Carter, which required more deliberate effort than he allowed himself to acknowledge. Emma found out about Richard's visit from Gerald, who had stopped by the garage in the afternoon and heard about it from the hardware store owner, who had seen the expensive car parked outside. Gerald told Emma with the careful, slightly apologetic tone of a man who believes in honesty but feels bad about what he's about to deliver. Emma listened without expression. She thanked Gerald. She waited until he left. Then she went to the back of the garage and found her father finishing up the Kawasaki. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. Jack didn't look up. "Tell you what? Ryan's dad came here this morning." Now he looked up. "Gerald," he said. Not a question. "He should have told me immediately, but yes, Gerald." Emma crossed her arms. "What did he say, Dad?" Jack was quiet for a moment, measuring. He had always tried to protect Emma from the weight of his past, not because he was ashamed, but because she deserved a childhood that was lighter than his had been. But she was 16, and smart. And she was already in it, whether he'd chosen that for her or not. "He found out about Iron Ridge," Jack said. Emma's expression didn't change. "And he implied he might use it." "Use it how?" "Question my fitness as a parent." Jack said the words evenly. "It's not a real threat, but it's the kind of thing that makes noise before it goes away." Emma was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a truck rolled past on the street. The afternoon light was going amber. "Are you scared?" she said. "No," Jack said. "Are you worried?" "Yes," Jack said. "There's a difference." Emma looked at her father. Really looked at him, the way you look at a person when you're trying to see past what they're presenting. She had been doing this her whole life, looking at her father and feeling that depth beneath the ordinary surface, the thing she couldn't name. "Dad," she said, "I need you to tell me something true. I always tell you true things. I need you to tell me something you haven't told me yet." She held his gaze. "About before." The garage was very quiet. Jack put down his tools. He turned to face his daughter fully. He looked at her for a long moment, at her mother's eyes, at the jaw that was his, at the 16-year-old person she had become without him being able to stop time and catch his breath. "Not tonight," he said, "but soon. I promise you soon." Emma looked at him for 3 more seconds. Then she nodded once, and that was that. Because Emma Donovan understood at 16, what most people take decades to learn, that some truths have to be told at the right time, and forcing them before that time only breaks things. "Okay," she said. "But Dad?" "Yeah. If someone tries to take me away from you," she said, and her voice was completely steady, "I will tell every person in this state that they're wrong. I will stand up in whatever room they put me in, and I will tell them exactly who you are." Jack looked at his daughter. Something moved across his face. Something that was not the controlled, flat expression he gave the world, something unguarded and deep and briefly visible. "I know you would," he said. "Okay," Emma said. "What's for dinner?" "Whatever you make," Jack said. "Because I cooked last time." "You made eggs." "Eggs count." Emma made an expression that communicated with remarkable efficiency her complete opinion of that argument. Then she went inside. Jack stood alone in the garage for a moment after she left. He looked at the corkboard with the photographs. Then he went inside too. On Thursday afternoon, something happened that shifted the shape of the whole situation in a direction that none of the principals had quite anticipated. Ryan came to the garage alone, not with his training partners, not with his phones out, not with the performance of Saturday at the market or the easy contempt of his first visit. He drove up in his own car, a different one from the black BMW, and he sat in it for almost 10 minutes before he got out. Jack, who was inside working and happened to glance out the front window, watched him sit there and noted the detail without making anything of it yet. Ryan came in the way a person comes into a place they're not sure they'll be welcome, not aggressive, not casual, something in between that was less comfortable than either. "Is your daughter here?" were the first words out of his mouth. Jack, who was at the front counter reviewing an invoice, looked up. "No, she's at school." Ryan nodded. He stood near the entrance, hands in his pockets. He looked different from the man at the farmer's market. Not smaller exactly, less staged. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "To her. I shouldn't have at the hardware store. I shouldn't have touched her arm." Jack looked at him steadily. "I also want you to know," Ryan continued, and his voice was making the specific kind of effort that people make when they're saying something they mean and are also uncomfortable, meaning that I didn't know my father came here. He didn't tell me. I found out from Simmons, the attorney. A pause. "What he said to you was wrong. I told him that." Jack set down the invoice. "You told your father he was wrong," Jack said. "Yes." "How did that go?" A flicker of something crossed Ryan's face. The first real thing Jack had seen there. "About how you'd expect." Jack was quiet for a moment. He came around the counter and leaned against it with his arms folded, looking at Ryan Carter without the weight of Saturday between them. Just looking at a 24-year-old man standing in a garage, which was a simpler thing. "Why'd you really come?" Jack said. Ryan looked up. "I just told you." "You told me one reason," Jack said. "I'm asking for the real one." The silence lasted about 5 seconds. Ryan looked away, then back. He had the expression of someone who has prepared a particular version of a conversation and is now realizing the other person isn't going to take it in the direction it was prepared for. "I want to understand what happened Saturday," Ryan said. "At the market." "You lost," Jack said. "I know I lost." The words came out harder than he intended. He pulled them back. "I know what losing looks like. This was different. He looked directly at Jack. You didn't fight me. You made me fight myself. I've been competing for 8 years and I've never... He stopped. Started again. I want to understand how that's possible. Jack looked at him for a long moment. What you're asking, Jack said slowly, is not a question about technique. Ryan frowned slightly. What do you mean? You're asking why someone who spent 8 years building skill couldn't touch a mechanic in a parking lot, Jack said. You think the answer is a technique, a method, something you can take back to your gym and add to your training. Isn't it? No, Jack said. The answer is that you were fighting to win and I was fighting to end it. Those are two different intentions, and intention determines everything. He unfolded his arms. You were thinking about the next move. I was thinking about the last one. He held Ryan's gaze. Experience is just doing something enough times that you stop thinking about it. What you felt on Saturday was the difference between someone who knows the moves and someone who's past needing to think about them. Ryan was quiet. He was listening in a way that he didn't always listen, which was with the part of himself that was genuinely trying to learn, rather than the part waiting for confirmation of what he already believed. How long did it take you, Ryan said, to get past needing to think about it? Jack looked at him. Something in the question was genuine enough that he answered it honestly. Years, he said. And most of those years were in situations a gym wouldn't prepare you for. Ryan heard the door in that sentence. He looked at Jack directly. What kind of situations? Jack was quiet. People have been talking since Saturday, Ryan said. Not about the fight, about you, who you used to be. He held Jack's gaze. Is it true? The garage was very still. What did you hear? Jack said. That you ran a Hells Angels chapter, Ryan said. That you were the president. That people across multiple states knew your name. He paused. That you walked away from all of it to raise your daughter. Jack said nothing. Is it true? Ryan said again. Why does it matter? Jack said. Ryan thought about that for a moment. He answered carefully, which was itself something new for him, the care in it. Because if it's true, then I've been treating someone with... He stopped searching for the word, with a life I didn't understand, like he was someone I could dismiss. And I don't... Another stop. I don't want to be that person. Jack looked at Ryan Carter and saw something he had not expected to see. Not the champion. Not the rich kid. Not the young man who had grabbed Emma's arm and performed in front of a crowd. He saw someone having an honest moment, which in Jack's experience was the rarest thing a person could offer. Yes, Jack said. It's true. Ryan absorbed that. Then I owe you more than one apology, he said. You owe my daughter an apology, Jack said. The rest, he gestured slightly, is between you and what you decide to do next. Ryan nodded slowly. He looked around the garage once more, and this time the look was different from the 2 times before. Not dismissive, not calculating, just seeing it for what it was. I'll come back when Emma's here, Ryan said. She's home by 3:30, Jack said. Ryan nodded. He started for the door, then stopped. Mr. Donovan. He turned back. Why did you leave? Jack looked at him. The chapter, Ryan said. The whole life. Why did you walk away? Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said very simply, because the most important thing in my life needed something different from me. Ryan held that for a moment. Then he left. Jack stood alone in the garage. He listened to the car pull away. He thought about his daughter at school right now, sitting in some classroom, being exactly as sharp and stubborn and alive as she had always been, completely unaware that her father had just had a conversation he hadn't expected. He thought about how the world had a habit of doing that. Putting in front of you the thing you were least prepared to feel something about. He went back to the Kawasaki. Richard Carter's next move came on Friday, and it was not subtle. He had spent Thursday evening on the phone with 2 attorneys, a private investigator he used occasionally for business due diligence, and a contact in the Washington state family court system, who owed him a favor of the professional variety. By Friday morning, he had drafted what Simmons, when he read it over coffee, described privately as a document that would make a lot of noise and accomplish very little, which was sometimes the entire point of such documents. The document was a formal inquiry, not a filing, not a petition, but an inquiry submitted to the Chelan County Family Services Office, requesting a welfare review of a minor child in the custody of a parent with documented criminal affiliations. It named Jack Donovan. It named the Iron Ridge Hells Angels chapter, and it was filed on a Friday morning, which Richard had calculated would ensure the news circulated through Cedar Valley's administrative community school board contacts, local government, the network of people who gossiped at the diner and the church over the weekend when nothing could be officially done about it, and the rumors could move freely. Richard Carter had built a real estate empire partly on the understanding that information released at the right time in the right direction created its own pressure that had nothing to do with whether it was ultimately correct. He was not wrong about that. By Friday afternoon, the inquiry had been mentioned at the high school, first in the administrative office, then in the teacher's lounge, then among the students in the way all adult information eventually reaches students through gaps and overheard conversations and the particular frequency that teenagers operate on. By 4 o'clock, 3 different people had called Jack's garage to tell him what they were hearing. He thanked each one of them and hung up. At 4:15, Emma came home. She walked through the garage and went straight through to the kitchen and sat at the table. She didn't say anything. Jack came in from the garage, looked at his daughter's face, and knew immediately. "You heard," he said. "Someone in the office mentioned it," Emma said. Her voice was controlled. "Mrs. Garrett, she didn't know I was in the hall." A pause. "Dad, it's a nothing document," Jack said. "It's an inquiry, not a petition. It gets reviewed, the reviewer sees there's no merit, it goes nowhere." "But people are talking about it." "People talk." He sat across from her. "Emma, listen to me." He found the loudest empty can he could find and he shook it. "That's all this is." "Are you sure?" she said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were not. "I'm sure," Jack said. And then, because she deserved more, said. Her expression shifted. "Why?" "To apologize, and to ask questions." He held his daughter's gaze. "He's not the same as his father, Emma." "He grabbed my wrist," she said flatly. "He did, and he knows it was wrong, and he's going to come here to apologize to you directly when you're ready to hear it." He paused. "You don't have to be ready yet, but I'm telling you what I saw." Emma looked at her father for a long moment. "What did you see?" "Someone at the beginning of realizing something about himself," Jack said, "which is a hard place to be, and a necessary one." Emma was quiet. Outside, the light was going. The Friday evening settling in the way it did in small towns all at once and completely. "Dad," she said, "you said soon." Jack looked at her. "You said you'd tell me, about before." Her voice was very steady. "I think soon is now." Jack sat back in the chair. He looked at his daughter, his hands flat on the table, the same hands that had rebuilt engines and settled disputes and held Emma herself when she was 2 years old, and the world had just taken her mother away from both of them. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think you're right." He took a breath. "It started when I was 21 years old," he said, "in a bar in eastern Washington, and I want you to know before I tell you any of it that every single decision I made, every one I believed I was making for good reasons. Even the ones I'd make differently now." Emma folded her hands on the table. She was listening in the way she listened to things that mattered, with her whole self, making no sound. And Jack Donovan, for the first time in 14 years, told his daughter the truth about who he had been. Not the clean version. The real one. He talked for nearly 2 hours. And when he finished, Emma sat for a long time in the silence of the kitchen. The food was cold. The light outside was gone. Then she looked at her father and said, "You gave all of that up, for me." "For you," Jack said. "And for what I wanted to be." Emma nodded slowly. "The people who are trying to use it against you," she said. "They think your past makes you less." She looked at him steadily. "It makes you more. Don't they see that?" Jack looked at his daughter, at everything Sarah was in her eyes, at everything he hoped he'd managed to put there himself, and felt something that was too large and too quiet to have a name. "Some people will understand it," he said. "Some won't. That's true about most things." "What do we do now?" "We let it play out," Jack said. "We don't run, we don't hide, and we trust that the truth has enough weight to stand on its own." Emma was quiet for a moment. "And if it doesn't?" she said. Jack looked at her calmly. "It will," he said. He had lived his entire adult life building things that held under pressure. He understood in a way that only comes from having actually tested it, the difference between something that looked strong and something that was. What he had built here in this garage, in this town, in this relationship with his daughter, was real. And real things in his experience could be shaken. They could be pressured. They could be pulled at from every direction by men with documents and money, and the specific confidence of people who had never had anything truly tested. But they didn't fall. Outside Cedar Valley settled into its Friday night. People ate dinner. The diner filled up. Somewhere across town in the rented house on the north side, Richard Carter reviewed his documents and felt the satisfaction of a man who believed he was executing a plan. He didn't know yet that his son had spent the afternoon in a motorcycle garage learning something his father had never taught him. He didn't know that the thing he was trying to destroy was already stronger than anything he knew how to build. And he didn't know, none of them knew yet, that the next 72 hours were going to change every assumption every person in Cedar Valley had made about who Jack Donovan was, who Ryan Carter could become, and what it actually meant to have power in a world where you could lose everything and still not be defeated. The weekend was coming, and with it, the truth that could no longer be kept in a quiet garage on Mill Street. The call Jack had been dreading came on Saturday morning at 7:42, before the garage was open, before Emma was awake, before Cedar Valley had finished deciding what kind of day it was going to be. It wasn't from a lawyer. It wasn't from family services. It was from Phil at the gas station, who opened at 6 every morning and heard everything first. "Jack," Phil said, "there are people at the community center, with signs." Jack stood in his kitchen, holding his coffee. "What kind of signs?" "The kind that say, 'Protect our children,' and 'Gang members don't belong here.'" Phil's voice had the careful, apologetic quality of a man delivering news he wishes he could take back. "There are maybe 15-20 people, and someone called the local news in Wenatchee. Camera crew showed up about 20 minutes ago." Jack set down his coffee. "Richard Carter," he said. "Nobody's saying his name. But Simmons the attorney is standing at the edge of the parking lot in a jacket that costs more than my car, so you do the math." Jack thanked him and ended the call. He stood in the kitchen for 30 seconds. 30 seconds was what he allowed himself. 30 seconds to feel the weight of it, to let the anger move through him the way it needed to, and then to set it down and think clearly. It was a discipline he had learned in his 30s and practiced every day since, like a muscle that needed regular use to stay reliable. Then he went upstairs and knocked on Emma's door. "I'm awake," she said from inside. She always said that. She slept like him, lightly aware of the house around her. "I need you to stay inside this morning," Jack said through the door. A pause. "How bad be manageable," he said. "But I need you inside." Another pause. Longer. "Dad?" "Emma." "I'm not a child," she said. "I know that." He leaned his forehead briefly against the door, a gesture she couldn't see. "I know exactly what you are, which is why I'm asking and not telling. Please stay inside this morning." The longest pause yet. Then, "Okay, but you call me every 30 minutes. "Every 30 minutes, he said. He went downstairs, put on his jacket, and drove to the community center. When he arrived, the 15 people Phil had described had become 25, and the camera crew from Wenatchee had been joined by a second vehicle that Jack didn't recognize, and someone had written "criminal" in black marker on a piece of cardboard that a teenage boy Jack had never seen before was holding with the uncertain posture of someone who'd been given the sign rather than chosen it. Jack parked on the far side of the lot. He got out of his truck and he walked toward the community center entrance with the same unhurried gait he brought to everything, and people saw him coming, and the crowd shifted, that particular shift of a group that has been performing in the absence of its subject and must now contend with the actual presence of it. Simmons saw him from the edge of the lot and went slightly pale in the way that lawyers go pale when a situation moves outside the boundaries of their paperwork. Jack didn't look at the signs. He looked at the people holding them. He recognized 8 of them. Mrs. Bauer from the school board, who had 3 children and had once asked Jack to fix her son's bicycle free of charge because she couldn't afford the shop price. Dennis Holt from the hardware store, who Jack had given a fair price to on parts for 2 years running. 2 parents from the Little League team Jack had coached. A woman named Sharon who ran the garden club and had waved to Jack every Saturday at the farmer's market for 9 years. He stopped in the middle of the group and he stood there and he said nothing. That was the first thing that broke the performance. The absence of what they expected. They had expected anger. They had expected defensiveness. They had expected the guilty, cornered energy of a man trying to explain himself under pressure. What they got was Jack Donovan standing among them, looking at their faces one by one with an expression that was not angry and not hurt and not afraid, but something much harder to dismiss than any of those things. Quiet knowing. The expression of a man who understood precisely what was happening and had decided not to pretend otherwise. "Jack," Mrs. Bauer said, and her voice had already shifted from the tone of a woman holding a position to the tone of a woman who is becoming aware that the position may be different from what she thought. This is just about the inquiry, about making sure the community is informed." "Frances," Jack said. He used her first name, which he had the right to use because they had spoken at school events for 6 years. "Did you read the inquiry?" She blinked. Simmons told us about it." "Did you read it yourself?" A silence. "The inquiry," Jack said, addressing not just Frances, but the 25 people standing in the lot, many of whom were now not holding their signs quite as high, "states that I have documented criminal affiliations. That's what it says. Here is what it doesn't say." He paused. "It doesn't say I've been charged with anything. It doesn't say I've been convicted of anything. It doesn't say my daughter has ever been in danger or in need of any kind of intervention. Because none of those things are true." He looked at Dennis Holt. "Dennis, you've known me for 9 years." Dennis lowered his sign 2 inches. "You brought your truck to my garage when the transmission was going, and I told you before I touched it what it was going to cost, and I didn't touch it until you said yes. Is that right?" Dennis said quietly. "Yeah." "Have I ever given you a reason to doubt my word?" Dennis looked at the sign in his hands. He looked at it like he was seeing it for the first time. "No," he said. "No, Jack, you haven't." Simmons stepped forward from the edge of the lot. He had the expression of a man who has just watched a plan begin to fail in real time and is trying to calculate how to stop the bleeding. "Mr. Donovan, this is a public space, and these citizens have the right to—" "They do," Jack said. "Absolutely." He turned to look at Simmons. "And I have the right to stand in a public space and talk to my neighbors." He held Simmons's gaze for exactly long enough that the attorney looked away first. "Which is what I'm doing." He turned back to the crowd. "I rode with the Iron Ridge Hells Angels chapter from the time I was 22 until I was 36, he said. And the directness of it, the absolute absence of defensiveness or shame, moved through the crowd like a physical thing. "I was president for 6 of those years. I made decisions in that time that I have spent the years since accounting for. Some of those decisions I am proud of. Some I am not. That is the truth, and I will tell it plainly to anyone who asks." A pause. "What I will not do is pretend that my daughter, who has never harmed a single person in her life, deserves to stand in a school hallway and hear her father called a criminal by people who had not once before this week thought of him that way." Mrs. Bauer set her sign down. She set it flat on the ground without a word. And the woman next to her, seeing it, did the same. "I've been here 14 years, Jack said. "I'll be here another 14, and every day I'm here I'll do what I've always done. Work and take care of my daughter and treat the people in this town the way they deserve to be treated." He looked at the camera crew that had moved closer. He looked directly into the lens. "That is the totality of who I am. Any document that says otherwise is someone else's agenda, not mine." He turned and walked back to his truck. By the time he reached it, 11 of the 25 people had left the lot. The camera operator from Wenatchee had lowered his camera and was looking at his notes with the expression of a man who has come for a story and found a different one. Simmons pulled out his phone. His hands, Jack noticed, were moving faster than usual. Jack drove back to Mill Street. He parked in front of the garage. He sat in the truck for exactly 30 seconds. Then he called Emma. "Every 30 minutes, she answered immediately. "I'm home," he said. "How was it?" "Quiet," he said. "Dad." "It's handled, Emma." A pause. "I'm looking out the window." "I know you are." "Your hands are on the steering wheel." He looked down at his hands. He uncurled them from the wheel and put them in his lap. "I'm fine." "You're lying," she said, not unkindly. "But okay." A breath. "Come inside. I'll make breakfast." "I thought we agreed eggs don't count." "I'm making actual breakfast," she said. "Pancakes. Don't push me." He smiled, which was the first time his face had done that in 2 hours. He went inside. The call from Shepard came at noon. Jack was in the garage back on the Kawasaki because the Kawasaki was the kind of problem that responded to attention, and he needed to be around something that responded that way when his phone rang and Shepard's name appeared. "It's all over the forums," Shepard said without preamble. "The inquiry, the protest this morning. Someone posted the camera footage from Wenatchee." "How does it look?" Jack said. "Like a man standing in a parking lot telling the truth to people who needed to hear it," Shepard said. "Which is not the look Carter was going for, I'd imagine." A pause. "Jack, the chapter has been talking." "Shepard, not about action," Shepard said, and his voice had the particular careful weight of a man choosing every word. "About support, testimony, character witnesses. The kind of thing that goes in a room with a judge or a caseworker and lands different than it does coming from a private investigator and a real estate attorney." Jack was quiet. "There are 11 men in this chapter who have letters from veterans organizations." Shepard continued. 6 who have documentation of community work. 2 who now work in social services professionally, Jack. 2, because of what we built." Another pause. "We didn't just ride. You know that. You know what we actually were." "I know," Jack said. "Then let us say it. In a room where it counts." The silence on the line was long. Outside the garage, a car passed on Mill Street. Inside, the smell of motor oil and metal, and the particular quiet of a space that Jack had made from nothing over 14 years. "They'd have to come here," Jack said. "They know that. Emma would see it." "Maybe," Shepard said. "It's time she did." Jack closed his eyes. Not in distress. In the particular way of someone weighing something very heavy against something equally heavy and trying to find the balance point. "Let me think," he said. "You have time," Shepard said. "But not unlimited time. Carter's attorney filed the inquiry Friday. They'll move on Monday." "I know the timeline," Jack said. "I know you know it." Shepard's voice softened slightly. "Jack, you taught me that asking for help when you need it isn't weakness. You told me that yourself. The night after you lost Sarah in the hospital parking lot at 2 in the morning. Do you remember?" Jack remembered. "I said we don't get through anything alone," Jack said. "You said no man's strength is big enough to carry everything by himself," Shepard said. "And that the only real leaders he'd ever respected were the ones who understood that." The words sat between them on the phone. Jack breathed. "Monday morning," Jack said finally. "Call me Sunday night." "I'll call Sunday night," Shepard said. He ended the call. He sat with the phone in his hand. Then he set it on the workbench and went back to the Kawasaki. He worked steadily for 2 hours, and if the work had a quality of prayer to it, methodical, repetitive each movement, precise and purposeful and applied toward something that needed fixing, he would not have used that word himself. But the quality was there. Ryan Carter had been sitting outside the Donovan garage for 15 minutes before Jack noticed him. He was parked across the street, not in front, as if he hadn't decided yet whether to come in. Jack saw him through the side window when he went to get a different socket from the wall mount. He watched for a moment, then went back to his work. 3 minutes later, Ryan came in. He looked different from Thursday. There was something worked through in his face, some overnight decision quality that Jack recognized as the aftermath of a person arguing with themselves until they reached a conclusion they didn't entirely want. "My father called me this morning," Ryan said from the garage entrance. "He told me the protest happened. He sounded pleased about it." Jack didn't look up from the engine. I drove past the community center," Ryan said. "Saw the sign still on the ground." A pause. "I talked to Dennis Holt, the hardware store guy. He was at the diner. He told me what you said." "Dennis is a decent man," Jack said. "He said you didn't get angry." Ryan moved further in. "He said you just talked to people like they were people." He stopped. "My father does the opposite. When someone challenges him, he escalates. He makes it bigger, louder, more expensive. He's very good at it." "It's a skill," Jack said neutrally. "It's the only skill he ever taught me," Ryan said. "That, and he stopped. Started again. He always said that showing someone you can hurt them is the same as respect. That if people knew you could damage them, they'd treat you right." Jack straightened up. He looked at Ryan directly. "And do you believe that?" he said. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "I used to," he said. "I thought in competition that's basically true. If people know what you can do, they take you seriously. Competition is a controlled environment," Jack said. "Same rules for everyone. Real life has no referee." He leaned against the workbench. "The difference between fear and respect is this: fear makes people do what you want when you're in the room. Respect makes people do what's right when you're nowhere near them." He held Ryan's gaze. "Which one do you actually want?" The question landed. Ryan stood with it. "My father is going to keep going," Ryan said. "The inquiry is just the first thing. He has more." He looked directly at Jack. "I'm telling you because you should know." Jack studied him. "What kind of more?" "He contacted someone at the state licensing board," Ryan said. "About the garage, looking for code violations, permit issues. Anything to create parallel pressure." He paused. "And he called a journalist. Someone who does longer investigative pieces. He wants a story that frames everything you were as a threat." The garage was very still. "Why are you telling me this?" Jack said. Ryan looked at him with an honesty that cost something. "Because what he's doing is wrong," he said. "And I'm done pretending that loyalty to family means pretending wrong things are right." His jaw tightened. "I told him this morning that if he didn't stop, I was done. With the development deal with Cedar Valley, with being involved in any of it." "What did he say?" A brief, humorless expression crossed Ryan's face. "He said I was being naive, and that I'd understand when I was older." "Classic," Jack said. Something almost like a laugh crossed Ryan's face. Then it settled back. "He's not going to stop on his own," Ryan said. "What are you going to do?" Jack looked at the young man across from him for a long moment. He thought about Friday night at the kitchen table, telling Emma the truth for 2 hours. He thought about Shepard on the phone that morning. He thought about Sarah, 14 years gone, in whose eyes he had once made a promise about the kind of life their daughter was going to have. "I'm going to tell the truth," Jack said. "Loudly, clearly, and with enough people behind me that no one can pretend they didn't hear it." Ryan looked at him. "The chapter," he said. Jack's expression didn't shift. "Where did you hear that word?" "Dennis Holt is a talker," Ryan said simply. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes." Ryan absorbed that. "How many?" "Enough," Jack said. Ryan nodded slowly. He looked at the corkboard with the photographs of Emma. He looked for a long time. "I'm going to come back on Monday," he said, "to apologize to your daughter, before all of this, whatever Monday brings." He turned back to Jack. "She deserves a real apology before the rest of it happens." "She does," Jack agreed. "Will she talk to me?" "That's her decision," Jack said. "But I'll tell her you asked." Ryan nodded. He started for the door, stopped again. He had a habit of stopping at the door, and Jack was beginning to read it. The gesture of a man whose instinct was always to leave, but who kept discovering one more honest thing to say. "Mr. Donovan," he said, "Jack is fine." A pause. "Jack." He seemed to test the word. My dad, he's going to make it look like you're hiding something. That's his strategy. He's good at it. He makes the accusation loud enough that people remember it even after it's disproved. He looked back. The only thing that beats it is making the truth louder. Jack looked at him steadily. I know. Good, Ryan said. And then with a directness that was new in him, clear of performance. I'm sorry I came here thinking I knew what you were. I was wrong. He left. Jack stood alone for the third time that day in the still garage. He thought about the young man who had grabbed Emma's arm 6 days ago, about the champion who had performed for cameras at a farmer's market, about the person who had now twice stood in this doorway and chosen to say something honest when lying would have been so much easier. People were complicated. Jack had always known that. It was the thing that had made him good at leadership, the understanding that no one was only the thing they appeared to be on first contact. You had to give people room to become the next version of themselves. You had to resist the human instinct to decide what someone was, and then stop looking. He was glad he'd kept looking at Ryan Carter. He was less glad about what was coming Monday. But Jack Donovan had never in his adult life been the kind of man who wished things were different from what they were. You worked with what was real. You prepared for what was coming. And you didn't waste energy on wishing the fight were somewhere else. He picked up his phone and called Shepard back. Sunday night is too late, he said when Shepard answered. Tell me who's coming and when they can be here. Shepard was quiet for exactly 1 second. The silence of a man who has been waiting to hear something and is absorbing the fact that he has finally heard it. Give me 2 hours, Shepard said. You've got one, Jack said. The Sunday that followed moved through Cedar Valley with a heaviness that the people who lived there would remember long after the specific events were over. The particular weight of a situation that has grown beyond the size it started, that has become something the town itself is now part of, whether it chose to be or not. The Wenatchee News piece ran online Sunday morning. It was not what Richard Carter had arranged for. The camera footage from the community center parking lot had been included, and the editorial decision had been to let Jack's words at the protest carry the piece rather than Simmons's framing. The journalist who filed it had apparently spoken to Dennis Holt, to Mrs. Bauer, and to Phil from the gas station, and what came through was a portrait of a town that had tried to hold a protest and talked itself out of it, while the subject stood in the middle and answered questions. The comments were running 4-1 in Jack's favor before noon. Richard saw it. He called Simmons. The conversation was not productive for either of them. Emma read the piece at the kitchen table while her father made coffee. She read it twice. Then she set down her phone and said, "They got the tamale thing wrong. You didn't set the bag down. You were holding it the whole time." Jack looked at her. "That's what you took from the article." "Details matter," Emma said. "If they get the small things wrong, people question the big things." She looked back at the phone. "Otherwise, it's pretty good." Jack sat across from her. He put his coffee down. "Emma, Ryan is coming tomorrow, before the hearing, to apologize." Emma's expression went carefully neutral in the way it did when she was feeling something she wanted to assess before she showed it. "Okay," she said. "You don't have to talk to him," Jack said. "I know," she said. "But I want you to know," Jack said, "that I believe he means it." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Is it weird," she said slowly, "that I already kind of knew it was going to go this way, that he was going to turn out to be different from what he acted like?" "No," Jack said. "You've been reading people accurately your whole life. I don't know where you got that." Emma looked at him. "Oh," Jack said. She smiled. Then the smile faded because she was 16 and smart, and she was thinking ahead to Monday and what it meant and what might happen, and the smile could only hold so long against all of that. "Dad," she said, "I want to be there, at the hearing." "Emma, I want to be there," she said again, steady and absolute. "Don't argue with me about this." He looked at his daughter for a long moment. This person who had his stubbornness and her mother's grace and 14 years of becoming herself in the specific quiet that he had tried to build around her. "Okay," he said. She looked slightly surprised that he'd agreed. She'd been bracing for a fight. You said you'd stand up in any room, Jack said. I believe you. So, you'll stand up. Emma nodded. She swallowed once, which was the only outward evidence of how much this meant to her. And Emma, Jack said. She looked at him. No matter what happens in that room tomorrow, he said, I need you to know something. The life we have built together, this garage, this town, these 14 years is the best thing I have ever done. Whatever I was before you, I would trade every single piece of it to be your father. Every piece, without 1 second of hesitation. Emma Donovan, who was smart and composed, and 16 years old, and her father's daughter in every important way, held herself together for approximately 3 seconds. Then she got up from the table, and walked around it, and put her arms around her father's shoulders, and Jack held his daughter in the kitchen on a Sunday morning in Cedar Valley, and let himself for exactly 1 minute simply be grateful. Grateful for the garage. Grateful for the town. Grateful for the tamales from Mrs. Torres. Grateful for Gerald and Phil, and even Dennis Holt, with his sign that he'd set down before anyone had to ask twice. Grateful for the specific, irreducible fact of Emma. Then he patted her shoulder twice, and she straightened up and went back to her chair and picked up her phone and said with perfect ordinary composure, I'm looking up the hearing procedures. Do I need to dress up? It's not a courtroom, Jack said. It's a review meeting. Still, she said. First impressions. You'll be fine in whatever you wear, Jack said. That's what people say when they haven't thought about it, Emma said, and started scrolling. Jack picked up his coffee. Outside Sunday afternoon was beginning, and across town in the rented house on the north side. Richard Carter was building his case with the detailed efficiency of a man who had never yet lost a war of paperwork and didn't believe today would be any different. And 50 miles outside Cedar Valley, moving down a state highway in tight formation, 12 motorcycles were riding in the specific direction of a town they had never visited, carrying in their saddlebags. Not weapons, not threats, not the performance of intimidation that the world assumed was all they knew, but documents, letters, 14 years of the truth that no one had thought to look for. Because Jack Donovan had once told his chapter something that had stayed with every man who heard it. The most powerful thing you can walk into a room with is a truth that no one expected you to have. Monday was 12 hours away. And what it was going to contain was something that Cedar Valley, and Ryan Carter, and Richard Carter, and everyone who had made an assumption about a quiet mechanic on Mill Street was simply not prepared for. Monday arrived, the way serious days always do, without ceremony, without warning, looking exactly like every other morning until you were already inside it. Jack was up at 5. Not because he'd set an alarm, because he hadn't slept past 4:30, and lying in bed after that felt dishonest, like pretending to be somewhere he wasn't. He made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window and drank it slowly and listened to the house breathe around him, the particular sounds of a home that two people had made together over 14 years. The creak of the third stair. The way the refrigerator hummed in a slightly different register than it had 6 months ago, and probably needed looking at the specific quality of silence that meant Emma was still asleep 1 floor above him. He had built this, all of it. From a decision made in a hospital corridor with a 2-year-old daughter and a loss so large it had no edges he could find. Nobody was going to take it from him. Not with documents, not with money, not with the particular machinery of respectability that men like Richard Carter had spent their lives learning to operate. But knowing that with certainty, and walking into a room to prove it, were two different things, and Jack Donovan had enough experience with high-stakes rooms to know that certainty didn't protect you from anything. Preparation did. His phone buzzed at 5:15. A message from Shepard. 4 words. We are in position. Jack read it. He put the phone face down on the counter. He finished his coffee. At 6, Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed in dark slacks and a blue blouse that Jack had never seen before. Her hair pulled back, carrying herself with the particular composure of a 16-year-old who has decided to be older than she is for exactly as long as necessary. Jack looked at her. You went shopping, he said. Yesterday afternoon, she said, while you were on the phone with Shepard. She came to the counter and poured herself coffee, which she was technically not supposed to have on school days, but which Jack was not going to argue about this particular morning. First impressions, she said. Jack looked at his daughter, at the person she was becoming so fast, It occasionally felt like something being done to him, rather than something he was watching, and felt the particular pride that has no good words for it, the kind that sits at the back of your throat. "You look like your mother," he said. Emma held her coffee cup with both hands. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. They sat together in the kitchen for 40 minutes without talking much. Comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who have been honest with each other long enough that words are optional. Jack ate toast. Emma ate cereal and read on her phone, and periodically showed him something, once a meme that he didn't understand, but smiled at anyway, once the updated comment count on the Wenatchee article, which was now running at nearly 600 responses. At 7:15, Jack's phone rang. Not Shepard this time. A number he recognized from a different part of his life, a number he had not seen light up his screen in almost 4 years. He looked at it for one ring. 2. "Who is it?" Emma said, reading his face. "Old friend," Jack said and answered. "Jack Donovan," said the voice on the other end, and it was deep and deliberate, and belonged to a man named Wallace, who had once been the national liaison for the Iron Ridge chapter, and who had in the intervening years become a paralegal with a firm in Spokane, and who had apparently been watching the Wenatchee news coverage. "Tell me you have legal representation for today." "I have Carla Dietz," Jack said. Carla was a family law attorney in Wenatchee, whom Jack had contacted on Saturday. A small, precise woman who had been practicing for 22 years, and who had, upon reviewing the inquiry, called Richard Carter's filing the most expensive way to accomplish absolutely nothing that I have seen this calendar year. "Good," Wallace said. "Carla's excellent. Listen, I've been making calls since last night. I have 3 signed declarations from veteran service organizations that the Iron Ridge chapter partnered with between 2008 and 2018. 2 of them have VSO directors willing to appear by phone at the review. One of them is flying in." Jack went very still. "Wallace. His name is Colonel Marcus Webb," Wallace said. "Retired. He ran the Spokane Veterans Assistance Network for 11 years. You helped fund 3 of his family housing programs, and you personally intervened in a domestic situation that kept one of his veterans from losing custody of his kids back in 2015. A pause. He remembers Jack. He's been wanting to say so for a while. Today seems like the right time. Jack looked at the table. His hand was flat on it. He was aware of Emma watching him, reading the quality of the call, the way she read everything thoroughly and accurately. "I didn't ask for this," Jack said. "Nobody asked if you were asking," Wallace said. "Shepard called, we talked, and this is what people who knew you decided to do." His voice had the particular tone of a man saying something he's been wanting to say. "You spent years making sure other people didn't have to stand alone. Did you genuinely think we'd let you stand alone today?" The kitchen was very quiet. "Thank you, Wallace," Jack said, and his voice was level, the way it always was, but something in it had shifted by 1 degree. 8 o'clock, Wallace said. "We'll be there." He ended the call. Emma looked at her father. "How many people are coming today?" she said. Jack looked at his phone. He thought about Shepard's message, Wallace's call, the 12 motorcycles on the highway Sunday night, Colonel Marcus Webb on a plane from Spokane. Enough, he said, which was what he'd told Ryan, and it was still true, and it was still the only word that fit. The Community Services Review Office was in a building on the east side of Cedar Valley that also housed the county assessor and the local DMV, a combination of functions that said something about the practical nature of small-town bureaucracy. The review itself was scheduled for 9 o'clock in a conference room that held maybe 20 people comfortably, and 30 if nobody minded being close. At 8:40, Richard Carter arrived with Simmons and 2 men from his legal team who had driven up from Seattle and who carried the quiet, expensive confidence of attorneys who are paid to be the most prepared person in any given room. At 8:45, Carla Dietz arrived with Jack and Emma. Carla was 51 years old, wore reading glasses on a chain, and carried a file box that she set on the table with the specific thump of someone who has done this many times and is not remotely concerned. At 8:50, the review coordinator, a woman named Patricia Henshaw, mid-40s, with the particular careful manner of a professional who has learned to reserve judgment as a survival mechanism, opened the conference room and began arranging materials. And at 8:53, the sound reached them. It started as a vibration, more than a sound. The particular low rumble that carries through walls and floors before it becomes identifiable as anything. Patricia Henshaw looked up from her materials. Richard's attorney, the senior one, turned his head slightly. Simmons went to the window. What he saw was 12 motorcycles pulling into the parking lot in a formation that was not aggressive but was absolutely deliberate. Each one parking with the kind of precision that comes from years of riding together. The men who climbed off were not in colors, no patches, no vests, nothing that could be characterized as a gang display. They wore ordinary clothes. They carried folders and document cases. Several were older than Jack. One was wearing a button-down shirt and carried a briefcase that had seen significant use. Simmons turned from the window. His face had gone carefully neutral. Richard Carter looked at him. "Who are they?" "I don't entirely know yet," Simmons said. Richard stood. He moved to the window. He looked at the men in the parking lot for a long moment. Something moved across his face that he controlled quickly, but not quite quickly enough. "It doesn't matter," he said. "This is a documents proceeding. Character witnesses have limited." "Mr. Carter," Carla Dietz said from behind her file box without looking up. "Character witnesses in a welfare review have considerable weight, particularly when they represent institutional organizations rather than personal relationships." She looked up over her reading glasses. "But I'm sure your team knows that." The senior attorney said nothing. Richard sat back down. At 9 o'clock exactly, Patricia Henshaw called the review to order. There were at that point 19 people in a room meant for 20. Shepard was there sitting behind Jack with the quiet solidity of a man who had once followed Jack Donovan through things considerably worse than a conference room and trusted the destination every time. 2 other chapter members flanked him. Wallace was in the back with a younger man Jack didn't know who turned out to be a paralegal colleague. And in the chair directly beside Carla Dietz at the table was Colonel Marcus Webb, not in uniform because he was retired, but carrying the posture of a man for whom certain habits had become permanent, who had flown in from Spokane that morning, and who shook Jack's hand when he arrived with a grip that communicated efficiently everything a handshake can communicate. Emma sat beside her father at the table. She had her hands folded in front of her, and her chin level, and her mother's eyes completely steady. Patricia Henshaw outlined the review process. She noted that the inquiry had been submitted on Friday, and that the purpose of the review was to assess whether the allegations warranted formal investigation. She noted that all parties would have opportunity to speak. She noted that the review was not a court proceeding. Richard Carter's senior attorney spoke first. He was good. Jack gave him that. He laid out the history of the Iron Ridge chapter, carefully selected pieces of it, accurately sourced, nothing fabricated, with the skill of a man who knew that you didn't need to lie if you chose your facts carefully enough. He talked about the chapter's documented activities in the late 2000s, about specific incidents in 2009 and 2011, about the culture of motorcycle clubs, and what the research showed about children raised in proximity to them. He spoke for 12 minutes. He was composed and professional, and the case he made in isolation sounded reasonable. Patricia Henshaw made notes. Then Carla Dietz spoke. She spoke for 22 minutes. She covered Jack's departure from the chapter in 2012, documented and verified. She covered 14 years of tax returns, garage licensing, business compliance, every piece of bureaucratic evidence that Jack Donovan was exactly what he appeared to be. She covered Emma's school records, which were, to use Carla's specific word, extraordinary honor roll debate team. No disciplinary incidents. Letters from 3 teachers submitted that morning, speaking to Emma's stability, character, and the evident quality of her home environment. Then she introduced Colonel Marcus Webb. The colonel spoke for 9 minutes. He did not use notes. He talked about the Iron Ridge chapter's involvement with the Spokane Veterans Assistance Network between 2010 and 2018. He talked about the family housing program that the chapter had helped fund. He talked about the 2015 incident in specific terms. A veteran named Thomas Harker. 2 children. A custody situation complicated by PTSD and housing instability, and the specific intervention that Jack Donovan had personally organized, which had resulted in Thomas Harker keeping his children and eventually stabilizing his life to the point where he now worked in peer counseling for other veterans. Thomas Harker is alive today, Colonel Webb said in the particular tone of a man for whom that sentence carries full weight. And his children are with him, because Jack Donovan decided that what the chapter was doing with its resources mattered as much as what it was known for. He looked at Patricia Henshaw directly. In 23 years of working with veterans organizations, I have met very few private citizens who did more practical good for struggling families than the Iron Ridge chapter under Jack Donovan's leadership. I would trust this man with my own grandchildren. I am saying that on the record. Patricia Henshaw had stopped making notes. She was simply listening. Richard Carter's attorney made a brief objection about the relevance of third-party testimonials. Patricia Henshaw acknowledged it and continued. Then Shepard spoke. Shepard was not a lawyer. He was not a veteran service director or an institutional representative. He was a large man with a gray beard and work-worn hands who had been a member of the Iron Ridge chapter for 21 years and who spoke with the directness of someone who has no interest in performing. I've known Jack Donovan since he was 22 years old, Shepard said. I watched him become the kind of leader that I don't have a better word for than fair. Not easy, not soft, fair. He paused. When his wife died, I watched him make a choice that nobody in that chapter expected. He walked away. From everything he'd built. From people who respected him and needed him, and frankly did not want him to go. Another pause. He walked away because his daughter needed a different kind of father than the one he was being. And every single man in that chapter watched him do it, and understood exactly what it cost him. He looked at the table for a moment, then back at Patricia Henshaw. I'm here because Jack would never ask us to be. And because what's being suggested in that filing that this man is a danger to his daughter is the most wrong thing I have ever been asked to sit quietly through. The room was very still. Richard Carter's jaw was tight. His senior attorney wrote something on a legal pad. Simmons was looking at the window again. Patricia Henshaw said, "Thank you, Mr. Shepard," he said. "Just Shepard." She wrote it down. Then Patricia Henshaw looked at Emma. "Ms. Donovan," she said, "you don't have to speak, but if you'd like to say anything, this is the appropriate time." The room waited. Emma unfolded her hands. She placed them flat on the table, the same gesture Jack used, though neither of them would have recognized it as a shared habit. She looked at Patricia Henshaw directly. "My father," Emma said, and her voice was steady from the first word. No warm-up needed, the voice of someone who has always known how to speak in rooms that mattered. "Wakes up every morning and goes to work to take care of me. He comes to every debate match and every school event, even when he has customers waiting. He coaches Little League and brings food to our neighbor when she's sick and drives 40 minutes in the snow to help strangers." She paused. "He's also a man who lived a big life before I was old enough to understand it. A life that was complicated and difficult and not always safe. And he walked away from all of it because he decided that being my father was more important than any of it." Her voice for the first time had something underneath it. Not breaking. Something stronger than breaking. "Whatever he was before I knew him, he is the best person I have ever met. And anyone who is trying to say otherwise has a reason that has nothing to do with my welfare." She looked at Richard Carter when she said the last sentence. Directly, without apology. The way her father looked at things. Richard Carter met her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked at his attorney. Patricia Henshaw was quiet for a moment after Emma finished. She wrote something on her notepad. Crossed something out. Wrote something else. "Mr. Carter," she said, addressing Richard. "Your filing states that the minor child is at risk due to the respondent's documented affiliation with an outlaw motorcycle organization. Is there any current evidence of active affiliation that poses a specific risk to the child?" The senior attorney began to answer. Patricia cut him off gently but completely. "I'm asking Mr. Carter." Richard looked at her. He was a man who controlled rooms. He was finding this one more difficult than most. "The historical affiliations themselves are historical," Patricia said. "Yes." She looked at her notes. "The inquiry references events going back 14 years. It contains no documentation of any incident during the 14 years Mr. Donovan has resided in Cedar Valley. No police contact, no domestic complaints, no school concerns. She looked up. Can you point me to any current evidence of risk? Silence. The senior attorney said, the nature of these organizations. I asked about evidence, Patricia said. Not organizational theory. The senior attorney looked at his legal pad. Simmons shifted in his chair. Richard Carter said nothing. That silence was the moment. The room felt it. The specific silence of a case that has just been weighed and found to be empty of what it claimed to contain. Patricia Henshaw set down her pen. I'm going to be direct, she said, which in Jack's experience were the 4 words that preceded the only kind of statement worth listening to. The purpose of a welfare inquiry is to protect children from genuine demonstrable risk. The documentation submitted does not establish current risk. It establishes a history that the respondent does not contest, combined with 14 years of stable documented community-embedded parenting. She looked around the room. This review does not support proceeding to formal investigation. The inquiry is closed. She stood. She gathered her materials. She was finished. Richard Carter's senior attorney made 3 more sentences of objection. Patricia Henshaw acknowledged each one and moved toward the door. She had the practiced, impervious manner of a professional who has made a decision and is not interested in relitigating it in the hallway. The room began to move. Chairs scraped back. Papers gathered. Jack sat very still for one moment. Emma put her hand on his arm. Just briefly. Just there, and then gone the way they communicated things that were too large for words. He put his hand over hers for 2 seconds. Then he stood up. Richard Carter caught up with Jack in the hallway outside the conference room. He came up fast. A step behind the senior attorney. A step behind that. And for a moment, it had the shape of a confrontation, the blocking of a path, the positioning of bodies, the instinctive geometry of a man who believes the conversation isn't over. Jack stopped. He turned to face Richard. He waited. Richard was composing himself. He was good at it. 60 years of practice. But something had cracked in the room, and it was still showing at the edges of his expression, not defeat. Because men like Richard Carter didn't process defeat. Defeat they processed temporary setbacks, but something rawer. The frustration of a man who had deployed his best tools and watched them not work. This isn't finished, Richard said. It is for me, Jack said. The licensing review. We'll find everything in order, Jack said. Because everything is in order. He looked at Richard without anger, without triumph, without the satisfaction that would have been understandable. With the same flatness. The same complete, settled understanding. Mr. Carter, you spent a week and significant resources trying to destroy something you didn't understand. A man you didn't know. A life you looked at and decided was smaller than it was. He paused. What did you actually accomplish? Richard said nothing. Your son, Jack said, came to my garage twice this week, on his own, without telling you. He held Richard's gaze. He's trying to become something. I don't know what exactly, but I can see him working at it. He paused. That's the thing you should be putting your resources toward. Richard's expression shifted. Something moved in it that was not quite what it had been, a hairline fracture in the absolute certainty that Richard Carter carried like armor. He was a father. Whatever else he was also that. And hearing his son discussed by the man he'd tried to destroy, in terms that were neither threatening nor contemptuous, but simply honest, did something to him that his legal team and his property deals and his strategic maneuvering had not anticipated. Ryan doesn't need your guidance, Richard said, but the words had less force than he intended. Ryan, Jack said, is figuring out the difference between what you taught him and what he actually believes. That's hard work. He's doing it anyway. A pause. You should be proud of that. Most men never try. Richard stood in the hallway with his senior attorney and his property liaison and the wreckage of a plan that had cost him more than money. He didn't have a response. Jack nodded once, turned and walked toward the exit, where Emma and Carla and Shepard and the others were waiting. He didn't look back. Outside, the morning had gone bright and clean in the way of Pacific Northwest fall days, all sharp light and cool air, and the particular clarity that follows something heavy being put down. The 12 chapter members were gathered near their bikes. They weren't making noise. They were just there. Present the way things that are solid are present without performing it. Jack came through the door and they looked at him. He looked at them. Shepard said, "Well, closed," Jack said. A sound went through the group, not a cheer, nothing theatrical. Something quieter and more real than that. The sound of people who had come a long way for someone and were glad they did. Jack shook hands. He embraced two men. He stood with Shepard for a moment in the specific silence of people who have known each other long enough that silence is communication. "Thank you," Jack said. "We were always going to be here," Shepard said. "You just had to let us." Wallace introduced him to the paralegal colleague, a young man named Dean. 26, sharp eyes, handshake, like a man who meant it. "He's been following the Wenatchee coverage," Wallace said. "He's been following the chapter's community work for a paper he's writing, academic paper Jack, about MC organizations and community integration." He paused. "Turns out the truth about what Iron Ridge actually did is a more interesting story than the one people assumed." Jack looked at Dean. "Who are you writing it for?" "University of Washington," Dean said. "Criminal Justice and Community Sociology program. My advisor's been on this topic for 3 years." He paused. "We've already got interviews from Colonel Webb from 2 of the veterans in the Harker program. We have the financial records from the housing fund." He met Jack's gaze steadily. "With your permission, we'd like your perspective too. Not for publicity, for accuracy." Jack looked at the young man for a moment. "Call the garage," Jack said. "Tuesday afternoon. We'll talk." Dean nodded. He was smart enough not to thank him twice. Colonel Webb shook Jack's hand a second time before getting into the car that would take him back to the airport. "Thomas Harker sends his regards," he said. "He saw the coverage. He wanted to be here, but he's in a counseling session on Mondays he can't cancel. He said to tell you that his daughter just got into college." Jack held that for a moment. "Which one?" he said. "Washington State," Webb said. Jack nodded slowly. "Tell him congratulations," he said. Webb drove away. Emma appeared at Jack's elbow. She had been talking to Shepard, who had made her laugh at something Jack hadn't heard, and there was still the tail end of it on her face, a lightness that the morning's weight had temporarily covered, and that was now coming back. "Shepard told me about the time you fixed the chapter president's bike from the Bellingham chapter," she said. "With a belt and a stick." "On a highway," Jack confirmed. "In the rain. He said you were extremely calm about it." "It was a simple problem," Jack said. "Shepard said you were always like that." Emma looked at her father with the same look she'd been giving him her whole life, the one that saw past the surface to whatever was underneath. "That nothing ever made you panic. He said the only time he ever saw you look scared was when they told you about Mom." She paused. "And then the next time was when you called him from the hospital 2 hours after I was born, because you didn't know how to change a diaper, and you were too afraid to ask the nurses, because you'd spent the last 6 years being the most intimidating person in 4 states. Jack looked at Shepard, who was very carefully looking at a tree. "That story was supposed to stay in the chapter," Jack said. "I told no one," Shepard said to the tree. Emma smiled. It was a full, real smile, the one that looked like Sarah, the one that Jack had spent 14 years trying to deserve every morning when he saw it. "Let's go home," she said. "The garage." "The garage can wait one morning," Emma said. "Come on." She started toward the truck. Jack watched her for a moment. Then he looked back at the community center building, at the parking lot, at the cleared morning around him. He thought about Richard Carter in the hallway, and the hairline fracture in the man's certainty. He thought about Ryan coming to the garage twice in 1 week, and the thing he'd seen building in him. He thought about Thomas Harker's daughter going to Washington State. He thought about the Kawasaki still waiting in the garage, half-finished Carol Briggs coming Friday for her charity run. I thought about Sarah 14 years gone, and the promise he'd made in a hospital corridor with a 2-year-old daughter who was now walking across a parking lot in dark slacks and a blue blouse, turning to look back at him with the expression that said clearly and without words, "Dad, let's go." He went. Ryan Carter was waiting at the garage when they arrived. He was sitting on the front step, which had a particular vulnerability to it. Not the posture of a champion, or a rich man's son, or a performer. Just a young man sitting on a step, waiting, not sure of his reception. He stood when he saw the truck. Emma got out first. She stood for a moment looking at Ryan across the distance of the parking area. Ryan looked back. He didn't move toward her. He understood correctly that this was her moment to approach or not. She walked toward him. She stopped 3 feet away. "I owe you an apology," Ryan said. He said it directly. No preamble, no elaborate setup. Just the words themselves. "What I did at the hardware store was wrong. Grabbing your arm, blocking your way, using my friends to make you feel surrounded." He held her gaze. "It was wrong, and I'm sorry. Not because it went badly for me afterward. Because it was wrong to begin with. You were just trying to walk home." Emma looked at him for a long moment. She was reading him the way she read everything. "Did your dad ask you to do this?" she said. "No," Ryan said. "My dad doesn't know I'm here." A pause. "My dad and I aren't really speaking right now." Emma absorbed that. "Okay," she said. Ryan blinked slightly. "Okay. You apologized sincerely," Emma said. "I accept it. That doesn't mean we're friends. It means we're people who've had a difficult situation and are deciding to move past it like adults." She tilted her head slightly. Which, given that one of us is 16, says something about the other one. Ryan stared at her for a moment. Then, for the first time in the entire stretch of events that had unfolded over 2 weeks in Cedar Valley, Ryan Carter laughed. Not the performance of ease he deployed as part of his public self. A real laugh, slightly surprised, coming from somewhere that hadn't been activated in a while. "Okay," he said. "Fair." Jack had come up behind Emma. He looked at Ryan over his daughter's head. "How's your father?" Jack said. Ryan's expression settled. "Quiet," he said. "He doesn't do quiet well." A pause. "He's going back to Seattle. The Mercer land deal, he's pulling out of it." He looked at Jack. "He told Simmons last night. I found out this morning." Jack said nothing. "I don't know if that's the right call for the town," Ryan said. The development was going to bring jobs. Real jobs. He looked uncertain in the way of someone who is holding two true things that are in conflict. But the way he was doing it doesn't make the outcome right, Jack said. But doesn't make the outcome wrong either. He paused. "The town will find another way if it needs to. Small towns always do." Ryan nodded slowly. "What about you?" Jack said. "Are you going back to Seattle?" Ryan looked at him. Something was working in his expression, something new, not fully formed, yet the shape of a decision still being made. "Not immediately," he said. "I told my training partner I need 2 more weeks here." He paused. "I want to understand something better before I go back. About the difference between—" He searched for the words, came back to Jack's words from the garage, knowing the moves and being past, needing to think about them. Jack looked at him for a long moment. "Come back Wednesday," Jack said. 7 in the morning. You can help me with the Kawasaki, and we'll talk." Ryan blinked. He had clearly been prepared for a more complex negotiation. That's it, Jack said. "You want to understand something, you show up and you work and you pay attention. That's how it's always worked." Ryan stood with that for a moment. Then he nodded. He said goodbye to Emma, who gave him a measured nod that was exactly the right temperature, neither warm nor cold. Simply the nod of someone who is keeping an accurate record and is willing to update it based on new information. Ryan seemed to understand exactly what it meant. He got in his car and drove away. Emma watched him go. "Wednesday," she said. "You're going to teach him something." "I'm going to let him watch me fix a Kawasaki," Jack said. "What he learns from it is up to him." Emma looked at her father. She had her arms crossed. Her head tilted, the expression of a girl who knows her father better than he gives her credit for. "Dad," she said, Yeah. You like him? Jack considered this with appropriate seriousness. I think he's at the beginning of something, he said finally. I like what might be at the end of it. Emma nodded slowly. She looked satisfied with that answer in the way she got satisfied when something she'd intuited turned out to be true. Okay, she said. I'm going to school. I'm already late. You're already late, Jack confirmed. Whose fault is that? Community Services Review Boards, Jack said. Notoriously inconsiderate of school schedules. Emma made the expression walk to her bike and rode away. Jack watched her go. Then he opened the garage. He put on the overhead light. He stood in the doorway for one moment looking at the corkboard with the photographs at the shelves with their specific order, at the half-finished Kawasaki, waiting patiently in the way that good machines wait without judgment, without urgency, ready to respond the moment you gave them your attention. He put on his work gloves. He went back to work. That was what he had always done. That was what he would always do. Not because the world had stopped being complicated. It had not, and it would not. Not because the past had been erased, it hadn't, and it couldn't. But because the work was real, and the garage was real, and Emma was real, and the life he had built from a decision made in a hospital corridor at the worst moment of his life had turned out to be exactly what he'd decided it would be. Solid. Genuine. His. Outside Cedar Valley was going about its Monday. Phil was at the gas station. Gerald was probably planning his trip. Mrs. Torres was making tamales for next Saturday. The diner was full at lunch. The community center was handling the DMV and the assessor and everything else it handled. And in a garage on Mill Street, a man who had once led thousands was fixing a motorcycle for a woman named Carol Briggs, who needed it ready by Friday for a charity run. And he was doing it the way he did everything, with complete attention, with honest hands, with the specific satisfaction of a person who has long since learned that the size of the stage has nothing to do with the quality of the work. That was the truth that Richard Carter's documents had failed to capture. That was the truth that 12 motorcycles and a colonel from Spokane had driven through the night to defend. And that was the truth that a 24-year-old martial arts champion sitting somewhere across Cedar Valley thinking about Wednesday morning and a Kawasaki, and something he hadn't quite figured out yet, was just beginning to understand. Some things could not be filed, threatened, or purchased away. Some things simply were. Ryan showed up Wednesday at 6:58. Jack was already into the garage. He heard the car pull up 2 minutes early and noted it without comment. Punctuality was information. It told you something about the distance a person had traveled between who they'd been and who they were trying to become. Ryan came through the door in work clothes, not gym clothes, not the athletic brand he'd worn every other time Jack had seen him. Jeans, a plain shirt, work boots that were new enough that he'd bought them specifically for this, which Jack also noted without saying. The Kawasaki, Jack said, and handed him a rag. They worked for 2 hours without much conversation. Jack showed him what needed doing, and Ryan did it, and he was good with his hands. In the way that athletes sometimes are, spatial intelligence, physical precision, the ability to follow a demonstrated motion accurately. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He didn't perform competence he didn't have. When he didn't know something, he said so and watched until he did. At 9 o'clock. Jack put coffee on the small machine at the back of the garage. He handed Ryan a cup. They stood on opposite sides of the Kawasaki, which was now considerably closer to finished than it had been 2 hours earlier. You want to ask me something, Jack said. Ryan looked up. Yeah. Ask it. Ryan turned the coffee cup in his hands. At the farmer's market. When we were... He stopped, reorganized. You weren't trying to hurt me. You could have, at any point. He looked at Jack directly. Why didn't you... Jack drank his coffee. Because hurting you wasn't the point. Then what was? Ending it, Jack said. There's a difference. Hurting someone is about you, your anger, your pride, your need to prove something. Ending something is about the situation. You take the minimum action necessary to stop what's happening, and you stop. He paused. The first one costs something. The second one costs less. Ryan was quiet for a moment. My coach always said winning was the point. In competition, yes, Jack said. Competition has a purpose. It develops you, tests you against controlled resistance. He set down his cup. But you've been living like every situation is a competition. Like every room you walk into is a mat, and everyone in it is either your opponent or your audience. He looked at Ryan steadily. That's not a life. That's just an extended warm-up for a fight that never ends. Ryan stood with that. It landed in him the way true things land, not comfortably, not with the satisfying click of confirmation, but with the particular discomfort of something that is rearranging furniture you didn't know you'd arranged. My dad lives like that, Ryan said, quietly, like he was saying it out loud for the first time. Every room is a negotiation. Every person is either useful or in the way. I know, Jack said. Is that what I looked like? Ryan said. When I came here, Jack looked at him. He had the decency to answer honestly. Yes. Ryan absorbed that. He nodded slowly, the nod of a person accepting something they'd have preferred not to be true. What changed it for you? Ryan said. The way you think about it. What changed it? Jack was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car passed on Mill Street. Inside, the garage held its particular stillness. Losing someone, Jack said. And then gaining someone. He glanced at the corkboard. In that order. One showed me what couldn't be protected by being the strongest person in the room. The other showed me what could. Ryan followed his gaze to the photographs. Emma at 7 with the fish. Emma at 13 in the cap and gown. Emma with the debate trophy. She's extraordinary, Ryan said. She is, Jack said. And she got that way because I chose every single morning for 14 years to be the kind of person she could learn something real from. He paused. Not the toughest, not the most feared. Real. She doesn't need a legend. She needs a father. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. When he looked up, something in his face had settled into a new configuration, less defended, less performed, closer to the surface. My dad called me last night, he said. Jack waited. He told me I'd embarrassed him. Coming here apologizing to your daughter, refusing to come back to Seattle with him. Ryan's jaw tightened slightly. He said I was choosing the wrong people. What did you say? I said I was choosing the right ones. He paused. First time I've ever said something like that to him. First time I didn't immediately walk it back. Jack looked at him. How did it feel? Ryan thought about it honestly, which was itself something new. Terrible, he said. And right. At the same time. That's what doing the right thing feels like sometimes, Jack said. If it felt easy, it probably wasn't that right. Ryan almost smiled. It was a real one, not the handsome performance, but something quieter and more substantial. Is it going to get easier with him? I don't know, Jack said. Probably not soon. Maybe eventually. He picked up his wrench. Some things can't be resolved. They can only be lived with honestly. He looked at Ryan. What I know is that the version of you that called him out last night is a better foundation than the one that drove into this town 2 weeks ago, thinking he already knew what everything was worth. Ryan nodded. He picked up his own wrench. They went back to the Kawasaki. 3 weeks later. Cedar Valley had gone back to its ordinary rhythms, in the way small towns do, absorbing the event, processing it through the diner conversations, and the hardware store counter, and the Saturday farmers market, and then incorporating it into the town's understanding of itself, the way a river incorporates a stone. It doesn't go around it. It goes over it, and the stone becomes part of the bottom, and the water moves on. Jack rode with the chapter on the last Saturday of the month, not to Cedar Valley, outside of it on the mountain roads that wound through the Cascades, the way the chapter had always ridden them, long and steady, and with the particular quality of silence that only exists between people who trust each other at speed. He rode at the front because that was where he rode, and because Shepard had left the position empty when Jack arrived at the meeting point, and because some things once established don't require renegotiation. He came home that evening with road dust on his jacket and a clarity in him that he always carried back from those rides, the clearing that came from hours of nothing but movement and the company of people who had known him at his worst and his best, and did not require him to be anything other than what he was. Emma was at the kitchen table when he came in, textbooks spread across it, 3 different highlighters in play. She looked up. How was it?" she said. "Good," he said. "Shepard. Sends his regards. Also says you're funnier than me." "He's right," Emma said, and went back to her textbook. Jack took off his jacket. He hung it on the hook by the door. He went to the kitchen and made 2 sandwiches without asking, because Emma always studied through dinner, and always denied being hungry, and always ate the sandwich the moment it appeared. He set one in front of her. She ate half of it without looking up. "Ryan texted," she said. Jack looked at her. "And? He's going back to Seattle on Friday." She turned a page. "He said to tell you he showed up to the Wednesday session." Ryan had come back every Wednesday morning for 3 weeks. He and Jack had worked through the Kawasaki, a 1994 Honda VFR that needed significant attention, and a 1989 Triumph that belonged to a man named Howard, who'd bought it at an estate sale and had no idea what he'd gotten into. They had talked while they worked, not therapeutic structured conversations, but the kind that happened between people focused on a shared task, which were, in Jack's experience, always the most honest kind. About competition and pressure, and what a father owed a son, and what a son owed himself. About the difference between discipline and punishment. About what Ryan actually wanted from the next 10 years that wasn't his father's idea of it. On the last Wednesday, Ryan had arrived at 6:50 again. He'd worked through the Triumph's electrical issue with a steadiness and attention that was genuinely different from the first session, not just physically, but in the quality of his focus, the way he held problems without forcing them. At 9 o'clock, drinking his coffee on the same side of the same motorcycle, he had said quietly, "I called my coach. I'm going back to training, but I want to change what I'm training for." "What do you mean?" Jack had said. "I've been training to win championships," Ryan said. "I want to train to understand it. To actually—" He'd paused, finding the word, "get past needing to think about it." He looked at Jack. "The way you said. I want to know what that actually means." Jack had looked at him for a moment. "That'll take longer than 8 years, Jack said. "I know," Ryan said. "I'm 24. I've got time." That was the last thing they had said about it. They'd gone back to the Triumph. And the following Wednesday, Ryan had been there again at 6:58, and they had worked until noon, and Jack had charged him nothing because Ryan had done actual work, and that was the arrangement as far as Jack was concerned. Now Emma finished her sandwich and turned another page and said without looking up, "He's a different person than when he got here." "People can be," Jack said. "You think he'll stay different?" Jack thought about Ryan Carter, about the morning at the farmer's market, about the doorway of the garage, with his honest stopping about Wednesday mornings with a wrench in his hand, and something being worked through in him that was more important than the engine. "I think he's got a better chance than he did," he said. "Because he knows it's a choice now. You can't know it's a choice and unknow it." Emma looked up at that. She studied her father with the look, the one that saw everything. "Did you know it was a choice when you left the chapter?" "Yes," Jack said. "Were you scared?" "Yes," Jack said. "Of what?" He looked at his daughter, at her mother's eyes, at the 16 years of choosing that sat between that hospital corridor and this kitchen table on a Saturday night, of getting it wrong, he said, of making the choice and still getting it wrong, of doing everything right and it not being enough. He paused. "Turns out the only thing that makes it enough is doing it anyway." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then she went back to her textbook, and Jack went back to his sandwich, and the kitchen was warm and quiet and ordinary, in the way of rooms where important things have settled into their permanent shape. Gerald stopped by on Sunday with a photograph he'd found, an old one from a newspaper archive he'd been browsing, dated 2011. It showed a Hells Angels chapter at a veterans event in Spokane. A row of men and motorcycles with American flags, and in the center of the photograph, unmistakably, a younger Jack Donovan standing beside a man in a wheelchair. Both of them looking at something outside the frame. Both of them in what looked unmistakably like easy, genuine conversation. Gerald set it on the workbench. Jack looked at it for a long time. "You knew," Jack said. "Not a question." "I suspected," Gerald said. "For a few years. The way people treated you when they didn't know I was watching. The way you handled things." He paused. "I didn't ask because it wasn't my business." He tapped the photograph gently. "This is." Jack looked at the photograph. The younger version of himself. The man in the wheelchair whose name was Thomas Harker, though Gerald didn't know that. The flags. The late afternoon light. "Did it change anything?" Jack said. Knowing. Gerald thought about it with the honesty of a 72-year-old man for whom honesty had become the only remaining option worth the effort. "No," he said. "You're the same man who's been fixing my bike for 9 years. You're the same man who showed up in the snow for Dolores Patterson and coaches those little league kids and makes sure Emma gets to every debate match." He shrugged. "The rest of it is yours, not mine." Jack looked at his old friend. "Thank you, Gerald," he said. "Don't get sentimental on me," Gerald said. "Is the shovelhead ready?" "She's ready," Jack said. Gerald nodded with satisfaction. "Good. I leave Thursday." He took the photograph back, tucked it into his jacket pocket, and went to look at his motorcycle. Jack watched him go. Then he turned back to the garage, to the work waiting on the bench, to the ordinary Tuesday morning of a man who had chosen this life from everything available to him, and had chosen it again, deliberately, every single day since. The strongest person in any room, Jack Donovan had learned, was not the one who could outlast everyone else in a fight. It was the one who had every reason to burn the whole thing down. The history, the reputation, the power, the loyalty of people who would follow him anywhere, and chose instead to build something worth keeping. That was not a moment. It was not a single decision made once in a hospital corridor. It was every morning. Every sandwich made without being asked. Every Wednesday at 6:58. Every time Emma looked up from her textbook and found her father exactly where he was supposed to be. It was the watch handed to his daughter in a farmer's market parking lot. Not a weapon, not a shield, just a quiet promise that what was about to happen would not change who he was when it was over. Jack Donovan was a man who had held enormous power and never once confused it for the thing that actually mattered. And that not the fight, not the past, not the legend, that men like Richard Carter had tried to weaponize, was the only thing about him that was truly, completely, permanently his.